Morning and welcome to the Wildfire Safety Advisory Board's October 3rd, 2023 public meeting. My name is Jonathan Frost and I am the advisor to the Wildfire Safety Advisory Board. I'm going to talk briefly about how to participate in today's meeting. We welcome public comment during the general public comment period on the agenda and if desired after any agenda item. The public may participate and comment in person or remotely by Zoom or by phone. Please note that public comment may be limited to 3 minutes per participant. There's a sign-up sheet for participants in person in the room. If you intend to provide public comment, please indicate which agenda item about which you wish to comment. Participants will be called upon in turn. Participants by Zoom will be placed on mute in listen watch only mode until the public comment portions of the meeting. During the public comment portion, participants can use the raise hand function on the Zoom video conference, and then they will be called upon. Please be aware that participation by Zoom while in the room in person may cause sound issues, and please mute your microphones and speakers as appropriate. Please note that the chat is disabled for participants and that we encourage participants to send all written questions and comments to our email address, which is wsab@energysafety.ca.gov. Participants by phone will be placed on mute in listen-only mode until the public comment portion of the meeting. Once the public comment portions of the meeting begin, participants may dial pound or #2 when they wish to speak to be placed in a queue by the operator. Next slide, please. Relevant materials for today's meeting may be found on our website. The link can be found on the public agenda for today's meeting. And additionally, public comments received in writing can be found on our website. The link for submitted comments can also be found on our public agenda. Next slide, please. On the screen is the list of the WSAB members. I'm now going to turn the meeting over to Chair Block.
Good morning. Thank you, Jonathan. My name is Jessica Block. I'm chair of the California Wildfire Safety Advisory Board, and I'll call this meeting to order. Today's October 3rd, 2023, and this is our third quarter board meeting. To begin, I'll do a roll call. Should I do the roll call? Okay. Jonathan, will you do it?
Chair Block, it says for you to do the roll call.
So, Alexandra Seifert.
Here.
John Mader.
Here.
Diane Fellman.
Present.
Ralph Armstrong.
Here.
Tim Haynes.
Here.
Chris Porter. He is out sick today. And so we are 6 out of 7. I'd like to thank you all for being here today. We welcome our newest board member, Tim Haynes, and thank our new vice chair, Chris Porter, for stepping up into the leadership role. Unfortunately, Chris is out sick today, so he couldn't be here, but he's with us in spirit. Thank you very much, our Office of Energy Infrastructure Safety IT professional, Rain Vasquez, for coming up and meeting us here today and setting up remote participation and assisting to ensure that the hybrid meeting will run smoothly. I'd also like to thank our staff advisors, Jonathan Frost, Sang Sobel, and our staff administrator, Marianne Aguayo, for coordinating all of the logistics to be here today and for our field visits. I'll turn the meeting back over to Marianne to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance and the safety moment.
Thank you, Chair Block. Please stand and repeat after me. Flags behind you. Pledge allegiance. The flag, the United States of Next slide, please. The focus of today's safety moment is on deer vehicle collisions and about driving safely as the days are getting shorter. There's an estimated 2.1 million deer vehicle collisions in the United States each year, killing about 440 people and causing 59,000 injuries and at least 36,550 deer fatalities. If you're driving by mountains, woods, or ag fields, generally anywhere in the countryside, there are probably deer in and around those habitats. Take wildlife crossing signs seriously. Moderating your speed gives you more time to react. Stay alert and don't get distracted. If it looks like you're about to hit a deer, don't swerve. Hitting the deer will often do a lot less damage than what could happen from swerving, like going off the road or crashing into a telephone pole or another car. Slow down if you can. If there are no drivers behind you, brake hard. A couple more things. The restrooms are out the door to the right. And the evacuation routes in case of an emergency. The stairs are immediately to the right as you exit the door, and also to the left. So if you go to the right, you go down the hall and straight down the stairs. And if you go to the left, the stairs are right next to you. Now I'd like to turn the meeting back to Chair Block. Next slide, please.
Thank you very much, Marianne. We'll review the meeting agenda. We'll start with general public comment, followed by the advisory board discussion and adoption of the meeting minutes from our last meeting, June 13th. Will be followed by a brief administrative update, including an introduction to our newest board member, Tim Haynes. We will get an update from the energy safety. And then the board will talk about some topics that we're embarking on in terms of fire threat regions and utility vegetation management and above ground distribution systems. This will be followed by presentations by Professor Michael Wara from Stanford on his latest research. And then we'll hear from Carolyn Godkin from the Climate and Wildfire Institute up here in Tahoe. And after that, we'll have a recap of our recent site visits, which have been really informative for us. Then we'll discuss next steps for our December meeting, and then adjourn the public meeting. So I'd like to start by saying that the board is embarking on investigations of important topics to us, discussing innovative approaches to distribution system design, vegetation management, and identifying fire threat zones that could each impact utility wildfire mitigation in California and inform the board's policy positions and advice. Furthermore, in keeping with the theme of previous board meetings and engaging with experts and thought leaders in the space of utilities and wildfire risk mitigations, we're excited to have Michael Wara of Stanford University and Caroline Godkin of the Climate and Wildfire Institute with us today. We look forward to this robust discussions with both of them later this morning. I'd also like to announce that there are some changes to the Bagley-Keene Act open meetings that are effective until the end of this year as a result of SB 143. The board may once again hold public meetings through teleconferencing without needing a physical location. Should Senate Bill 554 pass, then remote options may be made permanent. Joy, our legal counsel, is that correct? Is there anything else that we should discuss with respect to that?
By the governor. So,
Okay,
sorry, 544. And I'll provide an update on that to the advisor shortly. So
great.
that should be good. That's not apply as permanent, but we can discuss the details later.
Okay, that sounds great. We'll look forward to that guidance. Okay, so now we will move on to our first public comment opportunity. And then we also have opportunity for public comment after each agenda item if there's nothing currently at present. So let's start with public comment on the phone. Rain, is there anybody on the phone?
At present, there are no public comments by phone.
Okay, what about on Zoom?
There are no public comments on Zoom either.
Okay. Next, let's check the Wildfire Safety Advisory Board's email box. Jonathan, do we have any email communication?
Not at present.
And public comments are very important to us, so we'd like to wait a moment. Well, actually, is there anybody in the audience that would like to make any public comments? Thank you all for being here. We'll wait just a minute in case there's anybody that shows up at this moment. Rain or Jonathan, anything new?
There are no public comments online.
Nor on the email.
Okay, great. This will close the first phase of general public comment. Next on the agenda is the adoption of the minutes for June 13th. I'm sure that everyone has had an opportunity to read the minutes. Are there any edits or additions that anybody from the board would like to add? Great. And this is where I should ask for public comment on our meeting minutes. Okay. Any public comment on our meeting minutes? Going once, going twice. Okay. Can I get a motion to adopt the June 13 meeting minutes?
I so move.
Do I get a second? Right. Roll call vote for adopting the June 13 meeting minutes. Jonathan, will you do it?
Chair Block.
Aye.
Board Member Armstrong.
Aye.
Board Member Mader.
Aye.
Board Member Haynes.
Abstain.
Board Member Seifert.
Aye.
Board Member Fellman.
Aye.
So that is 5-4, 1 abstain, or technically 2 abstentions. Thank you for that vote.
Okay, moving on to administrative updates. I'd like to introduce our newest board member, Tim Haynes. Tim just started with us at the end of July and brings with us a depth of experience in state executive management in energy and water. He has extensive public utility experience and would love to give Tim a chance to introduce himself and his background. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Thank you, Chair. I've had 35 years, as the chair had indicated, in the water and energy sector, predominantly in the POU space. During that period of time, I've had a wonderful opportunity in order to be able to work with individuals and organizations that have embraced policy changes and changes within the organization that have led to organizations having to alter their processes and practices in order to be able to ensure that they're continuing to deliver safe, reliable, and economic services to their customers. AB 111 and 104 have expressed the state's interest in our utilities taking steps in order to be able to reduce their wildfire risk to the maximum feasible extent that can be achieved. I'm looking forward to working with my board members, the staff, the stakeholders that we have in the office in order to be able to confirm that that is being achieved. And so I just want to thank the governor for the appointment and for Director Thomas Jacobs' support, and I look forward to working with my fellow board members.
We're thrilled to have you, Tim. We're really looking forward to your advice and insights, in particular with our engagement with the public utilities. We've had this vacancy on our board for some time, so now we're a complete board of 7, and really looking forward to being a collaborative team. Thanks for being here. So in other administrative updates, we have 2 vacancies that will get posted. 1 program and project supervisor and 1 associate governmental program analyst. We anticipate that those positions will be posted this fall. We've also begun recruiting for graduate student assistants who will help us with some of our R&D efforts throughout the next year. So next, if we've got Colin Lang on the line, we'd like to hear from him for an update from energy safety. Oh, Colin, you're muted.
Muted. There we go. Okay, let me start again. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
My name is Colin Lang. I am an acting program and project supervisor in the Electric Safety Policy Division at Energy Safety. Thank you for having me today, and I'm here to talk about what the policy division has achieved in the past few months since the last WSAB meeting, and provide an overview of what we will be working on in the coming months ahead. I want to provide you an update in a few key areas. Firstly, the status and next steps associated with Energy Safety's evaluation of the Electrical Corporation's 2023 to 2025 wildfire mitigation plans, or WMPs. Energy Safety's 3 scoping meetings, which we have discussed at earlier meetings. A brief update on the work of our risk model working group. Brief updates in other areas such as the safety culture assessment, executive compensation, and our work to review existing safety requirements. First, an update on the wildfire mitigation plans. The 3 large IOUs, that's Pacific Gas and Electric, Southern California Edison, and San Diego Gas and Electric, submitted their 2023 to 2025 base wildfire mitigation plans on March 27th. Energy Safety has published draft decisions approving SCE and SDG&E's WMPs and has accepted written public comment on these draft decisions. PG&E was issued a revision notice on June 22nd. PG&E responded to the revision notice on August 7th, then provided a supplement to its revision notice on September 27th. Energy Safety plans to have a draft decision on PG&E's WMP published no later than November 14th. The small and multi-jurisdictional utilities and the independent transmission operator WMPs were submitted May 8th, and Energy Safety is currently evaluating those WMPs. Bear Valley Electric Service, Liberty, and PacifiCorp were all issued revision notices. Energy Safety has published the draft decision approving Bear Valley's WMP, and the draft decisions on Liberty, PacifiCorp, and the independent transmission operators are forthcoming. Energy Safety remains busy evaluating the WMPs and the comments that were received on the draft decisions. The wildfire mitigation plans and Energy Safety's draft decisions and revision notices can all be accessed through our docket. On the WMP guidelines development, we are currently developing new guidelines for the 2025 WMP updates that will be submitted by the utilities next year in 2024. The 2025 WMP updates will focus on significant updates between the 2023 to 2025 base WMPs and the 2025 update. The update submissions will enable each electrical corporation to provide new and updated information regarding its WMP in a streamlined way. And we expect to publish these guidelines this fall. Moving on to the scoping meetings. As mentioned at previous board meetings, Energy Safety's review of the 2022 wildfire mitigation plans identified 3 areas that would benefit from collaboration from a range of subject matter experts. As a reminder, these areas are utility vegetation management best practices for wildfire safety, community vulnerability in wildfire mitigation planning, and climate change modeling as it relates to wildfire risk. The scoping meeting on utility vegetation management best practices for wildfire safety, always a mouthful, was held in early February, and the one regarding community vulnerability was held in early May. The last scoping meeting focused on climate change modeling as it relates to wildfire risk and was held on July 25th. During this meeting, there was a presentation by a staff member at the California Energy Commission regarding the Cal Adapt and 5th climate assessment programs, and there were 5 panels on the following topics: heat, aridity, vegetation, and wind. A recording of the event is available on Energy Safety's YouTube channel if you'd like to check it out. Energy Safety looks forward to the continued engagement on these scoping meetings and their associated work processes with board members. The Risk Model Working Group continues to hold meetings each month. Topics since the last board meeting include long duration wildfire, PSPS planning models, and avoiding bias in wildfire probability modeling. The next session, which is October 11th, will cover standardized wildfire risk type classifications and in situ wildfire risk assessment. Onto brief updates in other areas of our work. The safety culture, the 2023 safety culture assessments have been completed, and the 2023 reports with findings, including recommendations, are in the process of being drafted. And we plan to publish those SCA safety culture assessment reports by the end of this year. Energy Safety completed its review of the 2023 executive compensation structure submissions and issued final decisions approving those executive compensation structure submissions on September 20th. Development of the 2024 executive compensation guidelines is underway, and a draft will be published for comment in the next month or 2. Finally, an update on our work to develop regulatory recommendations for wildfire safety in accordance with Public Utility Code Section 326A7. As you all know, Energy Safety has commissioned a study to analyze existing safety requirements for electrical corporations and provide recommendations for updates to existing regulations to mitigate wildfire risks. The study assesses whether updates to current safety requirements and/or implementation of new wildfire safety requirements may be necessary to mitigate the effects of climate change and prevent utility-caused catastrophic wildfires. The study from our contractor is due at the end of this month, and Energy Safety will be evaluating this report and providing its recommendations to the California Public Utilities Commission, hopefully by the end of the year or early in the new year. That concludes my report for the policy division. I very much look forward to strengthening our partnership with the board and collaborating on these important topics moving forward. Thank you very much for your time, and please do let me know if you have any questions on the matters I have spoken about today.
Thank you, Colin. Could you reiterate what that report is that you're giving to the CPUC at the end of the year?
Yes, that's the 320, that's the report in response to Public Utilities Code 326. And it will recommend updates to particularly general orders based upon to mitigate the effects of climate change and prevent utility-caused catastrophic wildfires.
And is that at the end of this year or next year?
The end of this year.
Okay.
Yeah. Or early next year.
Okay. And then I was wondering if you could also reiterate what the outcomes or outputs of the risk model working group are intended to be. Are there going to be direct write-ups about the conclusions there and how they'll fit into maybe the WMPs?
We have published sort of general findings and a summary of what has gone on with the risk modeling group in the past. To be frank with you, I do not know what the result will be for this year, the end result.
Right. Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other questions from board members?
Yes, this is Board Member Fellman. Hi, Colin, you're a little square on my screen here, so I'll look at you. We're going to have a discussion on the agenda today to talk about an area of interest to our board, and one of the deeper dives in the policy area that you just mentioned, the 326.A.7 process. So I'm hoping you can stay on for that discussion and then work with our advisors to figure out a way that the board can really be involved in that process upfront rather than, and engaged, providing our expertise to you as appropriate.
Yes, as many of you know, when I am not in my acting role, I am senior environmental scientist, so utility vegetation management is close to my heart, and I will be sticking around for that discussion.
Thank you very much. Let's see.
For public comment.
Thank you, Joy. Are there any public comments? I'm just gonna do a blanket request. It's for Zoom, phone, and email. Are there any public comments virtually?
At present, there are no public comments.
Okay.
There are none on the email either.
Okay, any in the audience that would like to speak to the update? Okay, thank you. Okay. So we'll move on to our board discussions of our, I guess, special topics of interest. The board's interested in, we as a collective are interested in providing our advice towards special topics that are discussed and part of the WMPs and some of these scoping meetings that energy safety is having. In particular, we have a goal of transforming the latest science and best practices in the nexus of wildfire risk mitigation and electric utilities into policy. To that end, we plan to discuss an innovative construction technique for electric distribution systems, referred to as above grade distribution systems, or AGDS. I'll turn this over to Board Member Mader to lead the conversation.
Actually, Chair Block, this is Jonathan.
Yeah.
In the interest of time, since Colin is on the line, I suggest that we begin with the vegetation discussion,
Sure.
and then we'll turn over to Board
Okay.
Member Mader.
And I'll make the
Well,
vegetation.
actually, considering that he's talking about changing all kinds of geo orders. I think the above grade construction is also a pertinent discussion.
Let's start with John. I think, can we skip through the slides and go back?
Yeah, and Colin said he was going to stay. He
Yeah.
just, in response to my question, he was going to stay for this agenda item.
Okay, yeah, if that's fine with Colin, then we can do that. Rain, if you will, please, we need to skip ahead several slides, and I'll tell you which one. Just a moment. Starting at slide number 24.
There we go. Okay, John, take it away.
All right. Morning. When I started my career as an electric distribution engineer, I was assigned the planning. Excuse me, I just wrote this this morning. The planning and protection for Amador and Calaveras County. Those counties are right in the middle of our high fire threat district areas. The topographies of those counties have relatively high populated lowland hill areas with shrubs and relatively sparse forests, deciduous forests, to having intensely pine forests on top of granite. One day, the system operators called me. There'd been an outage in a cable. They wanted to know if they could feed it from an alternative source. It was fed from a way easterly substation in Calaveras County, and the load was in Amador County, 17 miles away. And they wanted to know, could they feed it from an alternative source? You know, frankly, I was a bit surprised because we're talking about an area that was all granite. To think that there was an electrical cable, which is usually underground, that it had failed was kind of astonishing, because how did they get cable in the ground? Like, normally they'd have to blast holes in the granite with explosives to be able to put the base of poles in to be able to do it overhead. So I was wondering how they did it. Well, it turned out they didn't put it underground. What they did years ago, decades ago, is the engineers and the crews of those areas put the electrical cable on top of the granite. They covered it with bags of cement, and they let time and rain take its course. Guess what? Close to 30 years later, those cables were still functional. They were still feeding load, and they'd been installed at a far economically lower cost than undergrounding in granite. And they achieved almost the exact same mitigation of wildfire risk during that entire time, right? So when we first saw the wildfires, the highly impactful wildfires of today, and we saw the calls for undergrounding or overheading, the problem with overheading and armoring the overhead, trees still fall into those lines. They still knock those lines over, right? And undergrounding, well, that's not going to be economically feasible everywhere. And the amount of time that it would take to be able to spread that through the entire system, to be able to build the industry, to be able to do that, that's not really going to be feasible. It's going to take decades, and it's going to have all kinds of exposure to risk. Whereas perhaps we should consider an alternative construction technique in those type of areas, in those type of topographies. So next slide, please. So what am I talking about when I say above ground distribution systems or above grade? We can't decide quite on what the name should be. I'm talking about construction techniques where either you have some sort of conduit, some sort of protective, like be it polymer, be it armored, be it put down on slats on the ground, be it between armored conduit on concrete stanchions. Somehow we lower the where the cable is, where the electrical conductor is, from high up in the air to low on the ground. And the advantage you get from that is, like, as I discussed, you're not subject to topping. You're not subject to tree lines coming over. So you gain almost all the protection from undergrounding something while you're doing it above grade. All right, go to the next slide, please. Now, I didn't cover the last bullet on the one, but I can do it from memory. Yeah, we're probably talking about this technique being useful in low traffic areas. It's something probably that you're not going to see on the side of a road where somebody can, where people traveling can make contact with their vehicles. But there are plenty of locations where it's remote, where it would be appropriate, where the environmental impact would be negligible. And frankly, we're all actually kind of already familiar with this in our lives. You can literally walk up to a power pole that's got a riser, that's got high voltage distribution level cable in it. You can lean against it, right? It's all over. It's right. It's in our sidewalks. It's all over the place. You can see it everywhere, and we deem it safe. That's safe, right? And you see it also in when we cross bridges. This is a particular one that's far. You can see that's far away from traffic, but oftentimes there is traffic nearby. So it's actually not, it's not unknown. We're just talking about instead of it going up a pole where people can contact, we're going over granite, over long distances. Next slide, please. So why is this important? Well, let's talk about the Dixie Fire, right? In that area, you were talking about overhead electrical systems that took 10 hours for first responders to get to. So remote. And what happened? A tree made contact with an electrical overhead line, and the electrical overhead line was chosen as the engineering preferred solution here because of the grade of the cliff. Going up that hill wouldn't even be feasible really to put some undergrounding sometimes because of the pull on the system. So what did they do? They went with overhead line. What happened? Unfortunately, you maintain a distance away, you clear the forest away from electrical overhead lines, but they're not long enough for all the trees, and the tree made contact, right? And in 10 hours it took to cook that tree and start that fire. We had a serious problem. That was the beginning of the Dixie Fire, right? So what is the solution? Can we underground the situation? Well, the topography in that area is not suitable for undergrounding. So if we were able to develop a new construction technique, new manufactured goods to make it more efficient, you could almost think of them in some situation as conduit Legos that you could put together and anchor into the ground. Like the engineering mind boggles with the different types of techniques that we could develop, right? The other advantage is that undergrounding, you're going to have to come back every 30 years. You're going to have to pull out that system. You're going to have to put something in new. And with the techniques that they're using now, where they're pulling conduit through, all of that causes swivel. You'd have much greater access to the conduits to be able to maintain, replace those cables. I actually participated on the cable that we were discussing earlier. I actually participated in going out in a snowcat and helping with work with the crews to repair a cable outage. There are some advantages that we would be able to realize using a new construction technique. And then, one of the things that degrades underground cable is a trap of heat. If you don't have 36 inches of earth on top of the cable, you may be able to actually extend the life of some of these underground cables. Next slide, please. So obviously I'm an engineer. I love the idea. My mind boggles with different techniques, and I want to do this, I want to do that. But and I've seen this is starting to happen. We're starting to see manufacturers start to look at different techniques. That's not really what I think that this board should be calling for the regulators to do. What's happening is any installation of these type of systems is under experimental regulations that could take years and years and years. What I really think that this board should be calling for regulatory bodies, calling for municipalities, for reservations, for national forests, all to start talking about how are we going to implement this? Like when industry develops the techniques, what are the regulatory requirements? Where's the general order for this type of technique? We have one for undergrounding, we have one for substation, we have one for overhead. What are going to be the rules? What is going to say that this is okay? This is the techniques that the construction techniques that are acceptable so that it can be readily installed and so that we can realize that those wildfire risk mitigations faster and we can curtail that instead of waiting for industry to get ready, build the techniques, and let's get ahead of it. Let's start the regulatory process now. So Chair Block, that is a presentation of the concept of above grade electrical distribution systems.
That's excellent. Thank you so much for that presentation. Before I ask any questions, I'll ask if any other board members have questions or comments about this idea.
Board Member Feldman, I just want to note that the staff prepared a background memo for us. So maybe if the the staff has any comments, we could hear those as well now.
Excellent. To our advisors, Sang and Jonathan. Any further comments, or should we just make note of the memo that's posted?
So maybe just and let me know if you can't hear me. So this is Jonathan, advisor to the board. So maybe just to add to that, board member Mader did not mention that there's actually a pilot that's underway that PG&E is leading right now in the San Francisco Bay Area. And so it's about 3/4 of a mile, and they currently have a vendor, and there were some images from that vendor in our in the first slide of the presentation with some of the solutions that they have. And so we're really keen to see the outcome of this this pilot project, which is allowed under General Order 128. And we're also interested to collaborate with the CPUC to find out what additional next steps might come out of that. If there's a process for bringing this technology beyond the pilot stage, and what that might look like, bringing it into a general order, like board member Mader was mentioning at the earlier in the discussion. But yeah, we're very interested to see. They have some cost estimates, which seem to be quite a bit lower than the cost of undergrounding, but it still remains to be seen ultimately what level of savings might be achieved, and what level of safety relative to undergrounding. But we're very excited about the prospect of this technology, and we'll be keeping an eye out for the PG&E pilot.
Well, I want to comment on Jonathan's comments, which is it's when we were working on the memo, Jonathan kept saying technologies, and I kept saying techniques, right? And I want to distinguish that this doesn't require any new technologies to be developed, right? We already have all the technologies that we need for this. We already have the armored cable. We already have the idea of how to ground all of this, how to make it safe, how to make, you can literally, like I say, walk up to a power pole and put your hands on like centimeters away from 12,000, 21,000 volts. Like we know how to do this. It's the construction techniques, right? The orders, the general orders from as authorized by the CPUC provide rules, basically building codes for the utilities on how to build underground and overhead lines, right? And we don't have those building codes for this technique, right? They haven't been developed. And Jonathan rightly points out, and I'm glad that he went and inspected the experiment that was done, but is being done by PG&E. And this is something that is starting to gradually gain more acceptance. I have been a proponent of exploring this technique ever since the Napa fires. I've been in the middle of the response to the wildfires. That and other, that's why the governor appointed me to be on this board, right? I have been a proponent of this, and I simply haven't seen the speed at which the industry needs to respond. And it's starting to pick up. In the beginning, I would say that it was kind of considered a crazy idea, but after experiencing summers of having to go through public safety power shutdowns, it is gaining more acceptance. And actually, like our last meeting, our last workshop, there was excitement from different regulatory bodies, and I wanted to explore the idea. And so it's simply another technique. It's not always going to be appropriate in every situation. We're not going to simply go around and change out all overhead lines. But on my drive up here on Highway 80, you see on the On the northern side, you see voltage level pole towers. That's not appropriate. That's kind of probably too high a voltage. But yeah, I did see distribution level voltages lines going everywhere, where it would have been an appropriate technique where there isn't the kind of traffic, and it's simply another tool in the hands of the public utilities or the investor-owned utilities, another tool to mitigate the fire risk.
I have a question and comment.
Yep.
I'm really excited about this being articulated, and we do have this memo posted on our website for this meeting. What I think is really important and something that we can offer from as a board to energy safety is these sort of conditional or like environmental variability and conditions in which our recommendations are appropriate. Can you start to articulate where you would think this might be best applied, and where is this pilot project that PG&E is doing it?
Well, I'll leave to Jonathan where the pilot program is, but in that particular area, there's a protected right of way. When I think about this, I think about my experience as a young engineer discovering this cable, and you think about when you how when you fly over the Sierras, from the east, and you can see, you could see where the high Sierras are, where the bones of the earth are exposed. And then as you fly further west, you start to see it gets to pine forest, and then you see it get into, you see soil and you see deciduous. It's more towards the area where there is the granite, where you see the bones of the earth. That line, that cable that was out went 17 miles to serve what was it serving? A campsite, right? A very rarely used, only during the summer campsite. It was very low load. There's all kinds of areas up there that are very sparsely populated, and yet all through those areas, all through those potential wildfires, we have these exposed overhead conductor, right? Because that's the most economical way, and sometimes the only practical way to feed those. It's just not practical to go underground to those areas because of the granite. So, in particular, I would say that those areas are where I would see the most useful installation of this kind of technique.
So what are the next steps for us?
Well, I think as our memo says, it's to recommend to the CPUC to start workshops to and to the other regulatory bodies. I think that we also need to call upon government agencies that are involved to get acceptance. I think the national forests, they're kind of conservative when it comes to changes to the electrical system, right? And so I think you need to start having the conversation sooner than later with them, and just try and to show the benefits and how we're actually, we have this mutual interest. I saw some nodding heads on the conservancy of the national forest. So, I think that those are the things that it isn't the technology I use the word technology, the techniques, the manufacturers will come up with are we going to go with stanchions and armored cable between them? Are we going to go? I personally love the idea of little concrete Legos that fit together, and then you have this conduit in the middle, right? But they'll come up with all of that stuff. For us, where we have expertise in intergovernmental regulations, I think that's where we need to recommend the work get started.
Excellent. Thank you. We'll look forward to the next steps of that, and how let me know how I can support and coordinate.
Chair Block, this is Jonathan. Can I just make a quick clarification on Board Member Mader's comments
Absolutely.
regarding the memo? So the memo does not make a recommendation to the CPUC. It's a recommendation that we explore workshops as a potential next step. We encourage the CPUC to consider these ideas at this stage as we're exploring them, but we did not make a recommendation to them specifically.
Great. Thank you for that clarification.
So real quick, thanks, John. Real quick, I love the idea. I do have a couple concerns and, most of it is public perception. I mean, you did a really good job of doing that. We start talking about wildfire areas. I mean, we're either going in the air or on top of the ground. And then you have the 3 feet depth. Something else to consider too would be if you can't get 3 feet, what if you can get a foot and pour some other additional measures over top of it? I started thinking about wildfire fighting, and heavy equipment going across some of that stuff and potentially causing some issues down the road. But if you can get a foot below the surface or 18 inches or something like that, I guess what I'm asking is there maybe some consideration be given into not full depth, someplace in between with some other type of protections on top of it.
Of course, if it's suitable, if it's appropriate. When I look at the techniques that are being used for tracking undergrounding now that I'm seeing in the industry, where the geolocation of where every single item is geolocated, these systems I imagine would be installed with fantastic location systems. Agencies would know where they were. If you've seen some of the mock-ups for the above grade construction, they're colored, there'd be, and they're designed for vehicles to go over them if it has to be. It's kind of like, in some of these things, they're the K, the K railing that you see in between on the freeway between freeways going north and south, where people actually drive into it. It pushes them away. Like it's designed like that. So I mean, there's engineering techniques. Of course, if you could do it a little bit underground, that would be great. It depends on the situation, but like I said, the techniques I'm not so much worried about. It's starting the discussions to lead to the regulatory structure that can accept these techniques when they're ready. So hopefully, the techniques and the regulations arrive more or less at the same time.
Tim, go ahead.
Chair, I'm not sure that I have the current version of the staff memo and the associated recommendations. Could you have staff project that memo or read the recommendations so that we're all certain as to what it is that is going to be the next step that's coming out of our action here?
That's an excellent idea. Jonathan, should I try to pop it up, or should we hand it to Rain to project?
I can get it to Rain. Just
Okay.
one moment.
I have a comment while we're waiting for that, which is 2 things are happening today that I want to note for the general public and for our board. This is an opportunity for us. This is our we had a vegetation management discussion, and this is the second sort of policy thing we're raising. And for the public, due to Beverly Keene restrictions, we can't have discussions like this. And this is something we, as experts in our field, each of us have our own perspective, would love to talk about and, work out in conversation, but this is where we have to do it. So it's really exciting that we have an opportunity to do this. And I just wanted to commend Board Member Mader for pushing this idea, not pushing it, having this idea and moving it forward for the board. The second thing I wanted to note, and Colin, I'm glad you're still on the line, and that is that our board is more nimble in terms of what we can do and how we operate. So you'll see in our recommendation that we would like, and our intention, if the board supports it today, is to gather experts, invite regulatory bodies to just tell us what's going on and to raise awareness of this issue, recognizing our role is advisory to the Office of Energy Infrastructure Safety.
Yeah, we're not allowed to get together privately and discuss things. And so Board Member Feldman is, I look to you for guidance and in relations between state agencies, because you know how I am, like a bull in a china shop, right? I'm an engineer, right? And so the part about recommending who needs to talk to who, that's where I need help and guidance from others.
Wonderful. And so, I'd also like to just make a comment about this. It seems that I would assume, and I don't know much about the interagency relationships and what would need to be putting this into regulation, but I can imagine lots of people across the state talking about where it would be feasible and where it wouldn't be feasible and what the limitations would be from a technical and environmental standpoint. And so I wonder, we should probably put a call to those that are maybe not at the highest level of the organizations, but those that maybe are doing the field work that could help provide insights about how best to articulate these as new standards so that they can be successfully implemented. I imagine that this is very exciting to me because I think there's a lot we can offer at the interplay of the engineering conversation and the environmental research. And so just knowing how incredibly diverse our state is, that the far northern border of California and Oregon would have very different standards and needs than, say, the Edison territory, for instance. Okay, so absolutely. Rain, can you zoom that?
Good.
Great.
A chair block. The document is posted on the webpage for
Okay,
anyone to access.
great. Yeah, so this document is public.
Below the agenda.
And I wonder if we should describe where our website is. It is at the Office of Energy Infrastructure Safety website under the California Wildfire Safety Advisory Board. So I'll just read this out loud just in case it's hard for anybody else to read. The next steps for this memo are to offer the following recommendations on next steps. The board should host an initial public workshop to discuss the use of AGDS and electric distribution networks and better understand the use cases and benefits on such designs. This workshop should include the utilities and stakeholders such as prospective vendors, the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, which is CAL FIRE, and the U.S. Forest Service. Based on the outcome of the workshop and comments from stakeholders, the board should proceed to issue policy recommendations to help inform energy safety as part of its PUC 326.A.7 process. And I imagine that the regulatory limitations between local, state, and federal land are going to be dramatically different as well, right?
I imagine so.
Okay. Go on.
And again, I just want to reiterate my understanding of what, how we're moving forward as a board, which is to identify these issues and then gather information and call to convene this type of workshop. And then from the energy safety's perspective, to map the direction that we feel would be best taken, or not even the best direction, but at least a direction to further the issue that they're they're interested in, and helping them as a guide to what should be done.
Well, Chair Block, I'd also like to say that this is this isn't a new idea to me, at least. Obviously, I told you about my background, and I've been a proponent for this for quite some time. And I have to tell you that the perception of this idea is evolving. I think that, like I said, the people's experience of going through years of public safety power shutdowns have made minds more open to the idea of alternative construction techniques. And I think that obviously we advise the California the safety division, but we can also at least start this as a conversation inside this industry, inside of this regulatory environment, inside of the industry. Because I do it's just another risk mitigation technique that's potentially available, but we can't put it on the toolbox. We can't put it in the toolbox until we get this part done.
That's an excellent articulation. I was just thinking too, based on the topics and the climate change scoping meetings that Colin Lang was describing, that this also would create greater resilience across the increased winds and increased aridity risks that we might see across the state. So from here, I think I should take public comment, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll start from the remote comments from Rain and Jonathan. Are there any email, Zoom, or phone public comments?
We do have a hand raised from Neil Reardon.
Okay. Let's open his mic. Neil, go ahead. You are live.
Hi, good morning. My name is Neil Reardon. I'm with Sonoma Clean Power, the CCA serving Sonoma and Mendocino counties. Thank you very much for the presentation. And one quick question. This is the first time I've seen a photo of slightly below ground level, so the shallow trenching. And I'm curious if you can add any more detail on the types of locations where this is suitable. I imagine it takes a little bit more time and is maybe a little more costly than having the infrastructure mounted on top above ground level. But any other background you can provide on that would be helpful. Thank you.
Well, as I understand, this particular construction that is an experimental location. It's not in the topography that I was describing, where I've seen the cable cement on it. I guess for more details, I think we're going to have to have a workshop, right?
Right.
So, Neil, we'll make sure we invite you to the workshop. How's that?
Any other comments or to the question from the board members?
Yes, we have a question from Chris Parks. It's been written in. Chris asks, he has a question regarding the memo and the next steps. Can the WSAB provide its recommendations directly to the CPUC and others?
The answer to that question is that we can, and that this process that we've embarked on here is a way to have one board member's point of view shared with the rest of the board members through our legal requirements of this Bagley-Keene Act. So this gives us a chance to discuss it together, think about it, and then collectively embark on a process that we will do together. Then beyond the workshops, I think we would write up documents that we would then deliver to, well, actually, we would deliver them to energy safety. My bad. Sorry. Apologies. Right. So we are advisors to the Office of Energy Infrastructure Safety, and we would provide our recommendations to their process of revising regulations to the PUC. So it's a sort of a two-step process there. Can I get clarification? Can I get any corrections or clarifications to my comment? Joy, was that appropriate?
Yes.
Board Member Fellman, is there anything else we should say there?
No, our legal counsel will have the final word on that.
Did we answer Neil's question as well?
Yes.
Okay. I was going to ask if anybody else on the board had any comments to Neil's question. Okay. Any additional remote questions or comments?
At this time, there are no other questions on Zoom.
Okay.
Nor are there any on the email at this time.
Okay. Thank you, Jonathan. Any public comments or questions from the audience? Go ahead.
And could you please identify yourself for the transcript?
Well, I'd have to examine the topography, the particular topography there. I understand that that they're pulling conduit through there. I think they're pulling conduit through the earth. But I'd have to familiarize myself with the particular project to see if it would be appropriate. I would imagine there would be places that it would and it wouldn't. You know, I told you the engineering brain explodes in me when I'm thinking about this and the little Legos. I think also how you would transition from this technique to undergrounding, from undergrounding to overhead, back to this technique. There's all kinds of techniques that would be able, so that like if you had say 10 miles that you needed to go, well, okay, this part is appropriate for overhead because there's no vegetation whatsoever, blah blah blah. This portion over here, there's enough soil to be able to pull conduit in, and then transition, like maybe even transition under a driveway, you know, to you might be using this technique up to a driveway, transition down to 45 degrees, go into underground, come back up, go out that, like there's be all kinds of different ways to be able to do it. And it'd be a combination of risk mitigation, economics, because when board member Tim was talking about trying to get to the zero risk, like how fast can you get to that risk? Where can you most impact? Like how do you order the risk mitigation that you're doing to arrive at your risk mitigation as fast as you can? I would imagine that there'd be all kinds of different ways to do it. Does that kind of answer your question? Not really, but I have to study.
Well, my question was to, again, Pamela Grant. I am a representative of Congressman Kevin Kiley. I would like to know if you could comment on the appropriateness of if it had been above ground construction along Highway 70, the Feather River Canyon, and Highway 89 from Canyon Dam up to Lake Almanor, where they are currently doing extensive and disruptive PG&E work to underground their cables right now.
I would have to study the particular topography of those particular projects, but that's exactly the kind of area that I would imagine that there would be places where it would be extremely appropriate, or because of if it's low traffic, if it's far away from vehicles, or it depends on the design of the technique and their tolerances to be able to handle those things. There'd be a lot of different considerations, but those are the exact areas where this could be an alternative to either impactful or not impractical areas to go underground. And I like to think of it as, undergrounding is a reaction to the danger of overhead,
exactly.
Right? Mm-hmm. And so I like to think of this as our goal shouldn't be solely undergrounding. It should be de-overheading, right? Because you get the advantage of you don't have top strike. A top strike is when a tree is taller than the clearance and it comes over and it hits the top of the line. That's what's called top strike. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to, you don't have the danger of top strike through this technique. So I can't tell you specifically, but I imagine that if this technique was developed, if the regulations were there, that would be an option for PG&E to use to lessen the disruption that you're seeing in your community.
And one more question: do you know if PG&E had a choice when this construction was started?
Yes, I do know. They don't have a choice because it's only an experiment. There's only an experimental option through one General Order 128, the undergrounding order. There isn't any. that this option doesn't exist right now. The construction technique that I was talking to you about was unauthorized. It was done decades and decades and decades ago. So that's what I'm a proponent for, is so that it is an option for our utilities to be able to so exactly to lessen the impact of construction, or where it's not practical to underground.
I see. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much for that, for those questions, and would welcome your participation in the workshop when we get it organized. Thank you very much. Yes, carry on. Could you also introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, good morning. Susie Berlin for NCPA and the GSPC. I have a question, just a clarifying question. This is for distribution only, correct? Not transmission?
Well, technically it would be possible, but there's a reason when you look at transmission, you can tell what is transmission and what isn't, because like when I was driving up here and I saw those pole towers on the north side of Highway 80, I looked at the insulators and they were giant glass bells, because the reason why they have to be that big is because the higher the voltage, the more distance you need from a grounded surface, right? And so with distribution level, that's what you see on the side of a pole. So it's technically possible to use it with transmission voltages, but I think that it would be more feasible with distribution level voltages because of the necessary insulation to protect, to prevent grounding and faults.
So thank you. So for purposes of the recommendation here going forward, at this time, the recommendation is based on distribution only.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, great.
Thank you for that. Any other public comments from the audience?
May I ask another question?
Absolutely. Go on.
So is the direction here that this information would, Board Member Mader, would this information feed into the risk spend efficiency analysis, or is that separate from this?
Well, I think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, but I'm glad you asked that. Okay, so when I was talking about, what do you decide to put in first? What do you get the maximum amount of risk mitigation for your spend? I'll give you an example of really bad mitigation, which is to underground something that's being fed by an overhead system that's going to have to be shut down when the wind comes up. What could it do, right? So, I mean, with great risk efficiency is to underground from a substation that's fed from a transmission tower that's not going to be shut down when the wind comes up. That's risk spend efficiency. That's some efficiency on where you put your mitigation. So we won't know how to use risk spend efficiency in order to maximize the benefits that we get from construction until we develop those construction techniques, until we find out what the economics and different types of topography are. Or I don't know, for 100 feet of circuit, it costs this, or in this topography, it costs this technique costs that. And then we can compare that. And by the way, you're gonna have to look at total cost of ownership, right? Because you got to think about replacing it 30 years from now, right? So you're gonna have to look at all of that in order to figure out where you get the maximum amount of benefit for where you put it.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So I'll just do one more round. Any further public comments from the remote sources? Rain or Jonathan?
There are no public comments at this time.
Okay. And any more public comments from the audience? Thank you very much. Okay. I'm looking at time. It looks like we are on time, and I can transition to my comments or ideas, I should say, around vegetation management practices. Board Member Seifert, I'll be looking to you for additional comments. One moment. Oh, thank you. Yeah, so we should also So to close out Board Member Mader's memo and slides, should we, so if we want to develop consensus on next steps, should we vote on an agreement for a workshop?
So you can vote to direct the staff to organize a workshop, have like agenda ready, and then present a staff report to the board about sort of time, place, content.
Okay, let's do that. So let us vote as a board to request that the staff start to solicit feedback from us to organize that workshop. Does that sound okay?
Chair Block, I so move.
Okay. Do I get a second?
Second.
I guess we'll do a roll call vote.
Just,
Yes, go ahead.
just for clarification, the workshop's going to be called Above Ground Distribution Systems, or
I'm in favor of above grade, but if you have to have above ground,
This can come later. Just direct the staff to start organizing, and then they can brief you on the details in the staff report.
okay, I got a slightly different, I mean, it doesn't have to be above grade. I was just thinking anything less than the requirement, but could be below grade. So that was the reason I'm bringing that up. So I got it.
And I recommend that we'll do iterations. We'll provide iterative feedback as individuals to our staff for that. Okay. Right. Okay. Okay. Vote. Jonathan, will you do or do we need, is that what we need to do?
I can do the roll call for the vote.
Yeah, Joy, can I just say all in favor, say aye, or?
I'll go member by member.
Okay.
Okay. Chair Block,
Aye.
Board Member Mader,
aye.
Board Member Fellman,
Aye.
Board Member Armstrong,
Aye.
Board Member Haynes.
Aye.
Board Member Seifert.
Aye.
So that is 6 in favor, 0 against, 1 abstention.
Great, thank you. That was very cool. Let's go on to the next, to the next, my much more brief conversation around vegetation management issues. And Rain, would you go back through the slides? Yeah, right here. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, Chairwoman. Can we just confirm who moved for the motion and who seconded for minutes, please?
We had a move from Board Member Mader and the second from Board Member Feldman.
Thank you, Chairwoman.
Council, should we identify ourselves when we move in second? Would that be useful?
Yes, please, for the minutes.
Very good.
Thank you. Okay, as I've mentioned earlier, my interests have much to do with the tremendous variability in our environment in California and how that might best be understood for conditional variability in standards and regulations and vegetation management throughout the state. And I understand that state regulation would ideally have things be uniform, but I don't think that in the context of vegetation management that is really a benefit. And so what I'd like to do is just take a quick look at what our some of our current regulatory standards are for vegetation management for the utilities and where some opportunities for investigation might exist. And I intend to write a memo a similar type of memo to my fellow board members for our next quarterly meeting. Staff, Jonathan or Sang, would you mind kicking me off with the first slide?
Yes, Chair Block. And we may take turns, Sang and I. So
Okay.
this slide shows some of the vegetation clearances that are required by the CPUC general orders and the California Public Resources Code. So essentially the regulations are intended such that that the lines can maintain an aerial clearance throughout the year and of trees or branches. And what you'll see in the images in panels A, B, and C are the minimum line clearances that are required throughout the year. And typically what the utilities will do is that they'll clear beyond that at whatever point they do their vegetation work. And so if there is any regrowth that occurs over the course of the year, it will be limited theoretically to like a 4-foot clearance that's required under Geo 95 Rule 35. Panel B shows the pole brushing requirement. So basically you have to have a clearance of all forms of vegetation all the way to bare mineral earth in a 10-foot radius around the base of a pole, as well as 8 feet from the ground. And so that is that's California Public Resources Code 4292. And there's also not pictured, but there's also a defensible space clearance that's required under Public Resources Code 4291 of upwards to 100 feet for structures. So typically it's between 30 and 100 feet, depending upon the use of the structure. If it's a home, for example, it would be 100 feet. If it's a structure that's that nobody lives in, it would be 30 feet, for instance.
Thank you. Can we go to the next slide, please? So in our investigation, there's a few issues to note. One, that there's no current regulation that addresses the use of herbicides or growth regulators, which some utilities are using, and some utilities are explicitly not using, but there's no standard there to describe risks and or benefits. There's also no regulations to date to have specified use of remote sensing technologies and their benefits with respect to their visibility or accessibility. So where would these, for instance, UAVs for imaging hard to access infrastructure, how would that be best used and reported and evaluated? Also, with respect to inspections, the utilities are required to conduct visual inspections only every 2 years and detailed inspections every 5 years. And things that we're learning in some of the publicly owned utilities is that sometimes some of their infrastructure is inspected as often as weekly. And so we don't know if this frequency of 2 years and 5 years as a standard is a strong enough standard, depending on where the infrastructure is. And then the data collection, with respect to data collection, management, and accessibility, current regulations don't specify any requirements for data collection during inspections. And there, energy safety is embarking on requirements for GIS databases and specific metadata for the GIS data to be reported. But with respect to remote sensing and maintenance operations, we may be interested in specifying more specifically what those requirements might be. There are no requirements on how to store the data and which external parties can access them. And so that is a valuable conversation of its own. Next slide, please.
Oh, Chair Block, you also there was one more point on the situational awareness.
Oh, thank you. Could you speak to it, please?
Yeah, so there's no regulations to date regarding situational awareness or the use of situational awareness technologies by the utilities. So that could include That can include the use of cameras. It can include LiDAR and other remote sensing technologies. So there's no regulations in terms of when they're used, the level of visibility that's needed at any given time.
Thank you. And I think that also speaks to the sort of conditional understanding that all investor-owned and publicly owned utilities know their service territories quite well and may have different needs in terms of how they're monitoring for safety, so monitoring for maintenance and monitoring for safety, and what the situational awareness processes would be on a daily or elevated risk type of day. So Board Member Seifert, I'm wondering if I know you're just seeing this slide for the first time, but would you be willing to speak to it, or would you like me to start and then I can hand it to you?
Well, I guess you could either way. I'm looking at it. I mean, I looked at it prior to the meeting today, but I think all of this is research that I am familiar with, and I think all of it speaks to the variability and the differences in effects and effectiveness of vegetation management, depending on the location and depending on the procedure and depending on the vegetation type that you're in. I think in terms of thinning, I mean, from a general perspective, there are forests across the state that have experienced incredibly high stand densitying due to the removal of wildfire from forests that used to experience very regular, frequent fire. And in many cases, thinning the fuel is important for vegetation safety because there is a strong risk of high severity stand replacing fire if that's not the case. But in many locations, there are trade-offs because thinning could also increase the wind velocity in areas that have been opened up, or it could drive fuels that have been opened up. That is only just beginning to be studied. And particularly in shrublands, speaking of flammable invasives and speaking of time for inspection, the problem that we have in California is that pretty much everywhere we have these annual grasses that can colonize any disturbed area and typically do so as soon as the area has been disturbed. And they senesce very quickly. They are much more flammable than many woody vegetation types, and fires move very quickly through them, as seen through recent Maui fires and through the Marshall Fire in Colorado, for example. So grasslands have lower fire intensity, but they also spread a lot faster. And so one of the questions or concerns is, when removing vegetation, how can we ensure that flammable invasives are not colonizing and making situations worse? One way to speak to that is that green vegetation, such as oak woodlands, for example, tend to absorb windborne embers better than grasses. Sometimes people call oak woodlands ember catchers. And the discussion about fuel breaks, I'm sort of going around in a circle, counterclockwise. Fuel breaks, several studies have tried to empirically estimate when and how fuel breaks were able to control fires. Now, fuel breaks by themselves can slow fire behavior. They can change fire behavior, and sometimes that can buy time for firefighting resources. But in general, fuel breaks tend to be effective when there are people on them doing defensive work. Otherwise, regardless of the change in fire behavior, fires will typically either jump them through ember flow or eventually spread through them. So I'm not sure what exactly you wanted me to speak to. Those are just some of my comments on what you have here, but they all need to be factored into smart vegetation management strategies that account for differences in vegetation and trade-offs between flammability and severity.
Thank you. That's exactly what I was hoping you would speak to. So what I'm hoping that we as a board can describe is that the way the utilities have been regulated and the way the rules have been set to date, as far as I understand it, have been engineering standards. So if a tree is tall and it can fall into the line, we don't want that to happen. If embers can fall on the ground, we want to make sure that the ground is clear. But when we do, and it's very logical from an engineering standpoint. But when we start to do these things at great scale, the environment responds to it, and there are these potential unintended consequences. So taking a look at what the ecological and the fire ecological research has shown could help inform how we provide comments to energy safety with respect to changing these general orders. And so, I think it's a really interesting point that that thinning can exacerbate fire behavior if not done properly. Looking around throughout our field visits in the last month, there are some wonderful thinning exercises happening by foresters, and that's a very different exercise than, say, what you might call thinning or clearing the right of way. And then there's these concepts like the green belts research that would be valuable in places where there's irrigation, and there might be some recommendations there from a community level, but maybe not at the IOU level, for instance. So there's lots to evaluate here. Can we go to the next slide, please? Some things that we're taking into account are some of the best practices by the utilities to date. So SDG&E does a Right Tree, Right Place program, and works to, has a tree inventory database so that they're tracking all their individual trees in their service territory. Can we go to the next slide, please? And that the Liberty Utilities is partnered with the U.S. Forest Service for Forest Resilience Corridors program. And so that's going beyond their specific right of way, outwards 1,000 feet from the poles and lines. And I'm looking forward to having further discussions with them about what that looks like and how that program could potentially be scaled to other places. Next slide, please. And I'm particularly excited about the work that Southern California Edison has done. Tom Rolinski has developed a method by which he's subdivided the territory into 11 distinct regions that he calls fire threat regions or fire climate zones. And they're characterized by topographic variability, vegetation type, climate type, and fire return interval or fire frequency. And in doing that, you can see what kinds of fires exist in those territories and what those threats might mean to the infrastructure and the environment. And those types of characterizations then, I think, give a clearer understanding of what type of mitigations can then make those particular regions more resilient. And I would love to have a deeper conversation and potentially a workshop around defining these types of zones at a statewide level that could help energy safety and ultimately the CPUC be better informed around what policies would work best in what regions for regulating vegetation management, as well as things like this de-overheading or above ground infrastructure. Those types of characterizations that create these fire climate zones that Edison has developed, I think, is the kind of conversation that we need to have at the state level to approve or deny different types of practices. Next slide. I think that might be the last one. Yeah. So these are, we've done some investigative work on what other types of fire or ecological or climatological zones are classified by different agencies and research groups in the state of California. And there's a lot of variability there. So depending on what your objectives are, you could draw those boundaries very differently. We could do it by wind profile, wind and tree type. We could do it by snow, levels of snow. There's 1,000 different variables we can put in there. And so what I'd love to do is just initiate the conversation. Board Member Seifert, since you're not here, I wanted to just shout to you to see if there were any other comments you might like to add to the conversation.
No, I think this is great. And, like you said, there are many different ways to go about stratifying landscapes, but I think the important point is to just start thinking about how and why landscapes vary and how different approaches may be more or less appropriate. And I think that just starting the discussion about that could be really productive. So I look forward to that.
Thank you very much. Do I have any other comments from my fellow board members on the topic? Board Member Fellman?
No comment on the topic, but before we close this conversation, could you tell us your anticipated next steps?
Yes. So I'd like to put forward a memo proposing one way that we might describe breaking down. Okay, I'd like to put forward a memo that would describe proposing a workshop to talk about breaking down the state into these different zones, and how we define them is not yet clear. If we would call them fire climate zones or fire threat zones. The CPUC uses these high fire threat zones that are generalized and have not been and could be better informed by some of these additional variables. And so we'd want them to be we'd want the process to be complementary and informative, that the variables we choose are constructive. So I will propose putting forward a memo for discussion at our next board meeting in December, and take it from there. Okay. Any other comments or questions from my fellow board members? Okay. Rain and Jonathan, are there any public comments remotely?
At this time, there are no public comments.
Great.
There are also none on the email either.
Okay. Are there any public comments from the audience? Okay. Thank you very much. So that concludes my comments about investigation of vegetation management practices.
Excuse me, I think we should vote to direct the staff to prepare a memo for the next board meeting. Is that right, Joy?
Do we vote?
Do we have to vote, or can
I'd
we
like to I would personally just like to write the memo, and we can vote on the memo in December. Or do we need a process for the next
order? Chairman Block, is no one voted on my memo, so to author the memo.
That's true.
That's true.
So I don't think it's necessary.
I think it's fine if you're not going to direct the staff to do something.
Okay. All right, we'll leave it. Okay, so it's my understanding at the next, so I've taken public comment, so I can go to the next step on the agenda, right?
Yes.
Okay. Do we have Michael Wara on the line?
He's not currently available. He has some issues that he needs to take care of first before he can join. Hopefully be able to later this morning. Our next presenter is actually on her way to the town hall right now. My suggestion would be that we maybe take a short break, and then we can turn it over to her presentation.
That sounds great. All right, so Shall we do a 10 or 15-minute break?
Let's limit it to 10 minutes.
Okay, we'll take a 10-minute break and then reconvene. Thank you, everyone. Bring the meeting back. Okay. All right, I'll bring the meeting back to order. I'd like to introduce Caroline Godkin, the Director of the Climate and Wildfire Institute. I don't know if I have, would you mind introducing yourself, please, before your presentation? Thank you very much for being here with us.
You bet. Thank you so much. And thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm Caroline Godkin. I'm the Executive Director of the Climate and Wildfire Institute. We're a relatively newly formed 501c3, and it's just fantastic to be here today. A little bit about myself. I actually just finished up about 14 years working for the state of California in a number of gubernatorial appointments, both with CAL FIRE, the Resources Agency, and then my last appointment was with Cali, PA, where I was the Deputy Secretary for Environmental Policy and Emergency Response. So I'm just waiting for my slides. And, you know, a little bit about myself. I just spent 4 days riding in the Eastern Sierras and beautiful drive up 395 this morning. So it's just lovely to be here. We have the slides. While we're waiting for the slides, I can talk about the Climate and Wildfire Institute. So we're founded in 2022 as a boundary organization, and really with the goal to accelerate solutions to the climate and wildfire crisis. We were founded by a number of UC professors and folks who work in the climate space. We received initial funding of $7 million from the state of California, which was just an incredible opportunity for us. And I came on board in June of last year. So since that time, we've been hard at work supporting the governor's forest management task force. I'm hoping the list of our projects will appear here shortly.
I'm sorry, did you say boundary organization?
Yes.
Okay. Would you care to explain what a boundary organization is?
You bet. So operating in between academic research, policymakers, and practitioners, really with the goal of getting academic research into the hands of policymakers and practitioners faster, and also catalyzing research to be faster to respond to the needs of policymakers and practitioners. So really operating in that space. And also, I think about also currently we're very focused in California, but we want to be anywhere that our work is useful. Obviously, there are many places throughout the Western United States, but also throughout the world that are experiencing the same kind of issues that we are. So really operating at the boundaries of wherever we're needed to be. So here's a list of some of our projects. As I mentioned, we are doing a lot of work supporting the Governor's Forest Management Task Force. And right now, we just also received an additional $12.5 million of grant funding from CAL FIRE. I'm not going to go through the full list. I tried to hone it down to what may be most pertinent to your work and intersecting with kind of where you're thinking. Definitely happy to answer any questions on where you might be. So I'm going to just talk about the top three on this list. So if we could go to the next slide. So for those of you who were present or following the task force meeting here recently in August, what was unveiled was the interagency tracking system. And this is the dashboard. This is pulled directly from the task force's website. So CWI, with again using that core funding that we received from the state, worked with one of our consortium partners to build this really as a first of its kind way of tracking fuel treatments that have been accomplished. And we were really not only to get a picture of what has been accomplished, but also to guide where other work could be. And it's a really great tool. I popped the link in the bottom there so you can drill down and see that operating in real time. So next slide, please. So the other piece, and I've really put this under the bucket of how we're thinking about creating open digital infrastructure. We have been supporting the work of the task force, and we have two staff members who are supporting the regional resource kits. And these are a set of tools and data that have been created by task force region in collaboration with the Pacific Southwest Research Station, with the Science Advisory Panel, again, to really help folks guide their work within the regions of the task force. The final kit will be revealed, will be shown at the task force meeting this week, I believe. The other three of the kits have been already up and running. And again, I've popped the link in the bottom there so you can see the huge amount of information that's contained there. So next slide, please. So we have these two data sets that we've been working on. And so one of the CAL FIRE grants that we received is a research grant under their Forest Health Research Program. And the question is, can we create a federated data system that can build off these two sets of information and information in the future to create this place for practitioners, for policymakers to go and to be able to view that data? We're working with our consortium partners at UC San Diego, the Supercomputing Center, who are actually helping us to build this backbone. So initially, the information that's going to be coming in the first year is from the tracking system and the resource kits. And you'll see on the bottom there, this is the prototype viewer. The prototype viewer, we're trialing it with folks on the task force and some other stakeholders to be really able to go in and look and see this data and look at it. The goal is to be able to pull in this data, to be able to take a look at it, to have the tags on it. And then ultimately, as the reason it's a research project is really to see if can we build this system that has timely information, that people know that it's the source of it, that it's up to date. And ultimately, can we start to bring in additional data? For example, we've had the question on field data, on LiDAR data, all of those types of things. So next slide, please. So on this project, we initially, we're using our core funding. We actually built the needs assessment case, again, with our consortium partners at UC San Diego Supercomputing Center, who are very familiar with this. And we're now in this technical approach phase. And it's about getting the data in and then all the way through to the analytics. It's a 3-year project that we're going to be working on. It's a really exciting project that will sit alongside the other projects that the state is working on, such as Planscape. So next slide, please. So another piece of data, another project I wanted to talk about was the Year in Fire project. Again, we showcased this at the March meeting of the task force, and we're building this with our consortium partners at the Center for Law, Energy, and Environment at UC Berkeley. And we were really tossed the question by the governor's task force of how can we have a much more nuanced view of wildland fire and generally the fire season. We have a lot of measures that we commonly refer to, acres burned, those types of things. But we wanted to see if we could create a single place to bring that in. So for example, thinking about fire severity. So taking the acres burned, looking at fire severity, looking at the impact on watersheds, looking at return from fire interval in different types of ecosystems throughout California. So we presented this to the governor's task force again back in March. We'll be coming out with a report on that soon, and then looking at how we build this out into the future. There are a couple of other similar efforts currently underway, including the Moore Foundation are funding a similar effort with UC Santa Barbara NCs. So we're looking at how we can dovetail these efforts together. Again, really connecting the data and bringing a rich picture of what's going on built upon the data that's out there. Next slide, please. So one of the reasons I'm here today, I know Jonathan reached out because you'd hoped that we'd had our Lake Tahoe location. Unfortunately, that's not quite ready. We are in negotiations with Placer County to place a headquarters in Tahoe City. For those of you familiar with Tahoe City, we're negotiating for the use of the old fire station, which is right at the entrance to Tahoe City. And we want to have that to be a world-class place to bring people together, again, operating at the boundaries, to bring folks together to convene. We could think of no better location than Lake Tahoe, because not only is that a treasured asset that's at risk, but also a place that's doing some really creative work. I always like to tell the story of the Tahoe Summit 2 years ago. While the speakers were talking, you could hear chainsaws running on fuel reduction projects in the background. We also want to make sure that it's anchored in the community, so building in space for community arts, community education. So again, we're in negotiations with Placer County on that. Our second location, at the moment, we're negotiating with UCLA. UCLA have been a huge backer of CWI since the very start. And they are looking to create a sister organization called CWI at UCLA that would take the research questions that were generated and have a place for knowledge creation and knowledge hub, not necessarily with just at UCLA, but potentially finding wherever the best source of information is and how to really, again, operate at those boundaries, connecting policymakers and practitioners to the research, or even actually catalyzing and steering research, either at UCLA or with other academic institutions. So next slide, please. So this is kind of really, it's one of our guiding philosophies that we really are trying to drive change at the speed. I think of it at the speed of the current climate change and the wildfire situation that we have, for better solutions, faster solutions, research that is more targeted, but also for innovation and making sure that we're bridging the gap of getting innovation into the hands of policymakers. I was a policymaker for many years, and so really understanding what policymakers need and how to get that to them. So that's the end of my short presentation today. Definitely happy to answer any questions on any of our projects or CWI in general.
Thank you very much for being here and for your presentation. I'm very excited about the data that you're putting together. And, you know, I have infinite questions about where the highest severity fire has been, you know, what the repercussions of that have been. This looks like you're pulling that very data together. And with respect to making change to prevent that in the future, it seems that there's a lot of policy that needs to be changed in ways that are very uncomfortable, like environmental quality regulation, endangered species regulation, air quality regulation. Some have said to me, you know, could prescribed fires be exempt from air quality clearances, for instance? Are you investigating some of those difficult conversations?
You bet. And I think that's one of the beauties of being a 501c3, that we can really ask the difficult questions. And for me, what's really important is asking the difficult questions, but making sure that we're grounding the answers in science. So I love your question around prescribed fire. It's actually one of the grants we've received from CAL FIRE is to do a 3,500 acre prescribed fire on the tea kettle demonstration forest, which is in the Sierra National Forest. It's an incredibly treasured resource with over 100 years of research that's also critically endangered. You just have to look at the fire map around it. And just this September, there was a lightning ignited fire. So we're going to be doing that work. So one of the cases we're proving out there is how an organization like CWI could work with the Pacific Southwest Research Station in order to bring in those resources. But then we also want to take it further, and we're looking at the questions of what are the barriers to prescribed fire? Where do they sit? Is it right up front with environmental compliance? What does environmental compliance mean for this? What are we thinking about with environmental compliance? And what are the trade-offs that we're making? All the way through, as you talk about, to the issue of air quality, you know, and where actually are the pinch points? We're actually, great question. We're having a convening in a couple of weeks, and we're bringing together practitioners, policymakers, researchers, public health, to come to actually really dive deep on those questions to drive our research agenda for next year. So where do we need to look? And one of the projects that we have is called the Stewardship Project, and it's bringing Indigenous knowledge and Western science together to make federal policy recommendations. part of that is going to be around what are some of the barriers to using fire managed for resource benefit all the way through to prescribed and cultural fire. And we'll hopefully be having a special edition of a scientific journal coming out around those. So yes, we are absolutely committed to getting to those difficult questions and answering them with science, but also with the support of practitioners.
I have another question similar to that, which is forest thinning as an important precursor to the prescribed fire piece, and how many millions and millions of extra trees we have that probably need removing from just within the state of California. And are you having conversations? What's your engagement with the Forest Service and potentially the timber industry to do things differently?
Yes, all of those. So definitely with the Forest Service and particularly with their leadership on the Forest Management Task Force and with the research station as well. And absolutely, there is no doubt that we need to do things differently. Nobody's going to argue with that. And it's how we get there. And we cannot, part of the challenge is we cannot possibly treat immediately every acre that we need to treat. So there's a couple of decision points, and that's part of what Planscape and the Data Hub will answer. So where should we be targeting our precious resources now? In what form, to protect what values, and being very clear on what we are protecting. Or we are protecting evacuation routes, watersheds, all of those things. So that's kind of one bucket of work. Certainly something that we're encountering on the Tea Kettle project is we need to do almost a year of pre-work before we can put fire on the ground. So if we do want to expand the use of prescribed fire and also fire managed for resource benefit, what does that look like? How do we protect communities, which is critical? How do we protect our critical infrastructure? And finally, we're actually in a partnership with the Moore Foundation, and we are going to be looking at, they are targeting 10 watersheds across the Western United States as part of their resilience. So we're going to be working, supporting the folks on TCSI on that, but also building a learning exchange across the Western United States for these key watersheds to understand exactly what those barriers are, how much pre-work needs to be done, how do we think about protecting communities, all of those things. So yes, definitely thinking about all of that.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Are there any?
Well, I just looked up the Moore Foundation, but I was wondering if you could explain what is Planscape? You mentioned Planscape.
You bet. So Planscape was developed by the state of California, by the California Natural Resources Agency and Google.org, the philanthropic arm of Google. It is built to be a decision support tool. The Google folks have been, Google has donated a huge amount of time and energy to this. I believe that it is now transitioning over to being supported by the state of California, but it really is that decision support tool. So ingesting this key information, such as from the resource kits and things like that, to where should we be putting treatments, what type of treatment on the landscape in order to protect what values. We're also looking at, as the task force does its action plan update going into next year, CWI is supporting that, looking at some modeling scenarios for them in terms of what the what it looks like to put what treatments where and how much it will cost.
What are you treating exactly? I mean, you're treating, because we're looking at this through the lens of wildfire, right? Are you
correct?
But you're beyond that. You're looking at environmental concerns as well, or
it's looking at the whole thing. So what values are you trying to protect?
Yes.
So yeah. So is it the watershed value that you're trying to protect? Is it a community at risk that you're trying to protect? Is it an evacuation route? Is it critical infrastructure? And I believe, I haven't spent a lot of time in Planscape, but what Planscape will allow you to do is articulate what you're trying to protect at that time, and then tell you how to think about where to put the treatments and what it looks like.
Thank you.
Any more questions from the board? Board Member Seifert, I just want to make sure you have the opportunity to speak if you'd like.
Oh, thank you. This is the first I am hearing about CWI, and it looks like it's very relevant to a lot of the work I do. So I look forward to learning more.
Thank you. Any other questions from the board? Board Member Philman.
Thank you very much for coming up here today. I guess you're looking forward to being here more often.
Yes, definitely.
Excuse me. Following up on Dr. Seifert's comments, is there an access point for our board to be in conversation with your institute?
Yes, absolutely. Me. And I will definitely be happy to share my contact information as well. And I know the chair also is tightly connected with one of our board members, but definitely happy to provide any updates that would be helpful to you because there's just such strong overlaps between all of our work. And one thing that I feel passionately about is that we all need to make sure we're rowing in the right direction and doing it quickly because we don't have time to not do that. So absolutely, I'm happy to share my contact information. And obviously the chair knows how to get hold of us.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate you coming again. Thank you again. I'd like to ask for any public comments remotely.
Yes, we do have a question from Liz Podolinsky. Liz asks, can you put the link to the dashboard in the chat for those on Zoom?
Yes, please. Is it Rain? Could you possibly do that by clicking the link in the slide deck and adding it?
Yeah, let me find out.
And while you're doing that, Jonathan,
There are no emails at this time.
okay. Any public comment from the audience? Please. Oh, and would you restate your name also?
Oh, sorry. Can you come to the either the podium or
Okay. Yes. Do you have any plans for biomass fuels or any use of forest products? And I'll take my answer sitting there.
Again, another fantastic question. And it's certainly through my time both working at CAL FIRE and the Resources Agency and at Cali PA, it is a difficult and knotty question to get to. The use of biomass, how we can create economically viable products and ecosystems around biomass. This is not a topic we're tackling in this moment right now. What we're looking at the when it's public, the Governor's Task Force have a wood utilization work group, and they have been doing incredible work. And that report, I think, is coming out this week, but definitely one to look out for because that looks at the whole value chain of wood products that can potentially come out from this treatment. Once that comes out, we're going to be taking a look at it. And again, we want to apply ourselves in the most useful place. So we'll be taking a look at that and seeing how that may guide our work in future. But it's definitely absolutely something that is on our mind, both in terms of using it for potentially small distributed electricity generation, everything through to the incredible work the Washoe tribe is doing, building their mill in the Carson Valley. So the whole value chain and also innovative solutions as well.
Thank you very much. Any further questions from the audience? Okay. Thank you. We'll move on to our next item in the agenda. Has Michael Wara arrived?
So I just heard from Michael Wara. He said that he plans to join around 11:45 a.m. So
okay.
My recommendation, Chair Block, would be for us to turn to the next item in the agenda in the meantime, reflections on the recent site visits. Would you like me to proceed?
I would, thank you.
Okay, great. Okay. So next we'll have a more informal discussion on the recent site visits that we had in September at Southern California Edison's Big Creek facility east of Fresno. The Truckee Donner Public Utilities District site visit yesterday, and the site visit yesterday with Liberty Utilities. So I'd like to use this opportunity to share some of the highlights and takeaways from these experiences, especially since not all of the board members were able to attend due to the Bagley-Keene Act limitations, which affect our ability to discuss these things unless we're in a public meeting such as this. So why don't we start first with the SCE Big Creek site visit. You'll see in the slide a picture of several of us in jumpsuits that attended the Edison site visit that we had earlier in September. So Chair Block, would you like me to provide an overview? Would you like to start us off? Just let me know how you'd like to proceed.
I'd like to start off just by saying that Southern California Edison was incredibly generous to tour us around for a 2-day process, gave us an extensive tour of the hydroelectric facilities and how they generate electricity through the process, as well as extensive vegetation management practice exposure that we got to see. We got to witness in action. And I was especially fascinated to see that they actually also own and operate approximately 20,000 acres of forest that Edison acquired as part of the construction for Shaver Lake, but they're also maintaining the forest around Shaver Lake as part of a forest and fire resilience and watershed resilience effort. And there was a lot that we learned just being able to be there firsthand and see how the vegetation management practices have been working there for over 40 years, as well as the mitigation practices that they're doing now with all of the dead vegetation from the creek fire. So there was a lot that we learned and saw about that creek fire from 2020 approaching the Edison territory and how that fire behavior inherently changed once it came into well-managed forest. So that's my highest level overview, but Jonathan, I'd like you to expand on the visit, please.
Absolutely. So we were there from September 11th to September 13th. Well, I guess we arrived the evening of September 11th. So focusing on the latter 2 days. So the first day we had the opportunity to meet with their vegetation management crew, as well as get to witness not only firsthand some of their vegetation work, felling some of the trees that died during the 2021 creek fire, but we also got to see the burn scar from the fire and get a better understanding for how that impacted the area, how that impacted SCE's facilities and the community of Big Creek, which is primarily their employees. And we also got to have an in-depth discussion with their lead for the wildfire mitigation plan and their chief fire scientist. So we had a very comprehensive overview of their wildfire mitigation program and got to see various aspects of it out in the field. And adding to that, on the following day, we visited their one of their hydroelectric facilities, and we visited 2 of their dams over the course of the trip, and we saw a grid hardening project that was completed higher up in the mountains. Met with one of their linemen who explained the benefits of the various different mitigations that they've undertaken, both from wildfire mitigation perspective and also from the perspective of reducing risk to heavy snow and ice events. We also got to meet with one of their foresters who explained their forestry management practices, including prescribed burns, their tree nursery program, and explain how their vegetation management practices have helped reduce the severity of the creek fire when it came in 2020. one of the most interesting aspects of this visit was that we got to see how a utility would operate when they are not only the operator of the lines, but also the land manager, because typically the utilities operate within a narrow utility right of way for either distribution or transmission. And beyond that, it's the land manager's responsibility typically to maintain the forest around. There will be collaboration in some cases. We mentioned earlier in the conversation the Forest Resilience Corridors project with Liberty Utilities and the Forest Service, but other than that, it's typically between the specific landowner and the utility to work out if the utility has the opportunity to remove trees on their property, such as hazard trees that may fall on the line. But in the case of Southern California Edison, they own and operate their equipment in 20,000 acres for the purpose of maintaining their hydroelectric watershed. And they have a unique set of incentives that utilities otherwise typically wouldn't have. So they're following a number of best practices. We got to see them firsthand, and I think it was a really enlightening experience. Chair Block, would you like to mention anything else, or Board Member Haynes or Fellman?
Board Member Haynes.
One of the things that really struck me in the visit is you get a real insight into how the utility has embraced its responsibilities into the corporate culture. And, being there firsthand, seeing folks who were from the headquarters building all the way through the people who are out in the field actually implementing work. You saw a commonality in terms of a commitment to their efforts. And then for an individual like me who doesn't have a whole lot of experience in matters like this, I'll run into a blizzard of words when I'm trying to review things. And this really, I think, gave some practical insight into what those words actually mean and the commitment that the utility is making to meeting their responsibilities. And so that was really a prominent takeaway that I had from the visit. And I really appreciated the opportunity to be able to do that. I'm thankful for what Edison had done, and to the staff for being able to create that opportunity.
Board Member Fellman.
I share those views, Board Member Haynes, and I also want to add that the site visits are so important at this stage of our board's development, because we want to see what is being done on the ground, and we appreciate everyone who's accommodating us in that endeavor.
Yeah, I'll reiterate that it's just been so tremendously valuable to see the work that's being done on the ground, and how it's, how the context really matters to the work. So we visited Southern California Edison in September, but in our visit here to Truckee, we were also visiting the Truckee Donner Public Utility and Liberty, and just being able to see the contrast in service territory and the challenges that they face is hugely informative to how we see what we have to offer from the board. Should I take public comment at this time? No.
Chair Block, I suggest maybe it might be useful for us to maybe spend another couple minutes on the Truckee Donner and Liberty.
Oh, excellent.
Visits.
Yeah. So would you do an overview of those, please? Because I have yet to do the Liberty tour.
So I may have to turn this over to my colleague Sang or Mary Ann to provide an overview on the Liberty specifically, or on the Liberty tour specifically, as I also have not done it yet. I could speak briefly about the Truckee Donner site visit. So we actually let me just ask Chair Block, since all of us have done it now, we've had 2 separate tours. Is it worth spending the extra time for Board Member Seifert and for the public, or what is your opinion?
I don't know. What do you, I mean, because also I think we have time to kill before Professor Wara arrives.
We also have a discussion on the agenda too. So I'm happy to just start speaking and we can have a conversation. So in terms of the Truckee Donner visit, that was yesterday afternoon. We had our groups split into 2, and the Municipal Utilities Association, the shorthand is CMUA, provided us with a brief introduction to publicly owned utilities, and that was followed by a presentation from Truckee Donner Public Utilities District about their service territory and their wildfire mitigation efforts. Then we went out into the field, or actually before that, we went to their operations center, got to learn a little bit about what they're monitoring for, and saw some of their cameras for substations, their SCADA network, and then we went out into the field and saw a few different sites where they were doing reconductoring, pole replacement, and where they had done vegetation management work.
Thank you, Jonathan. Could I ask Sang and or Marianne to speak to the Liberty tour?
Yeah, I would like to thank you, Liberty, for having us there yesterday morning. The site visit was very great because we got to see Liberty resilient corridor in Lake Tahoe. They took us to 3 places. Also, they give us an overview of their work at their headquarters in near Lake Tahoe. And through the conversation with them, I learned that how much effort they have to put to coordinate the work with the U.S. Forest and other state agencies to get it happen. So we also learned that Liberty started their Right Tree, Right Place program last year. But we actually didn't know about that before, and if we would know that, we could put in our presentation about that this morning. And so Liberty and SDG&E are the 2 utilities that offer that program for their customer. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thanks. Board Member Haynes.
One of the things that that I take away from the discussion that we'd had yesterday in preparation for the visit of the Truckee facilities is that you've got a POU community that is very diverse. It's spread throughout the state of California, and there are 3 associations: the California Municipal Utilities Association, which was referenced, but you have Northern California Power Agency, Southern California Power Authority, and these agencies are effective in being able to bridge some of the gaps, I think, that exist between the representatives of the POU community, finding ways in order to be able to share best practices and give insights to across this community. And for me, that's it's helpful to be able to have insight into that, because there are many of the members in the POU community that don't have perhaps the resources and the level of sophistication that others do, and they have though access to the education that's taking place and the ability to be able to apply that to their unique circumstances. The other thing that really struck me is that what you see in a situation like that is the utility incorporating its wildfire management responsibilities into the enterprise that the organization has in order to be able to manage other significant risks that the utility is encountering. And so wildfire management is not a one-off for the utilities. It's embedded into the organization up and down, as well as then across. And it seems as though that's the only means by which an organization is going to be able to be effective in achieving its wildfire management objectives, as well as then, I think, integrating the responsibilities into the organization. And again, looking at it from that corporate culture perspective. And so again, I think that it's you have the opportunity to be able to engage at an organization with individuals who are professional, their expertise, but they labor in obscurity, and these give an opportunity to be able to really highlight the things that they're really passionate about and effective in completing.
Thank you. Completely agree. Any more comments from the board members on the field visits, site visits?
I also want to comment on how each host showed us how their efforts have increased over the years. And it's been this very steep climb in attention to wildfire mitigation activities. So that was a very, to me, that was a very informational slide in addition to everything else we learned. And again, there's nothing like going into the field and with the people who are working in the field and talking about how it impacts them. And what I really liked about Liberty, we have two of our hosts in the audience today, was that they showed us how they integrated with the Forest Service and that there was, and the community, and that was very interesting as well.
Thank you very much.
Chair Block, if I may, there was, I guess, just to reflect on both of these latter two site visits with Truckee Donner and Liberty. I think one thing that's particularly interesting is that these are both, in contrast to the large investor-owned utilities like PG&E, Southern California Edison, San Diego Gas and Electric. These utilities are particularly unique because of both their smaller size and their geographic location and climate that they operate in. So they have unique benefits of being able to see their service territory in a relatively short period of time and be able to inspect their facilities much more quickly than some of these larger utilities. However, they also face the challenges of a really short work schedule or a work season for adding new capital and completing various projects due to the long winters that you see up in the Sierra Nevada. So it was interesting to reflect on that.
Completely agree. Thank you. So do we need to take public comment for this section?
Yes, public comment for each agenda item, please.
Okay, so for our for the agenda item of discussion and recap of our utility site visits, are there any remote public comments?
At present, there are no remote public comments.
Great.
Nor are there any on the email.
Okay, any from the audience? Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to move on to the, what would be the final agenda item of the discussion for next steps in our next board meeting. Should we do that, Jonathan?
So first, I received a message from Michael Wara. He said that he would be available in maybe about 5 minutes. So I just want to verify that with our IT. Otherwise, I would suggest that we turn to the discussion and then wait for Michael Wara to join.
Okay. It's true though. I wonder if our next step conversation, well, I mean, it's possible that the Wara presentation could inform our next steps. That's true. So we have some time sensitivity from one of our board members. So can we, let's begin while we're waiting for him, our discussion on next steps and issues for consideration for future meetings. I'd like to start by just reiterating from my presentation that I intend to provide a memo to my fellow board members on potentially narrowing down some specifics to vegetation management practices that we could investigate. There are so many that have varying applications. And so I'd like to pick one or two and provide a memo that we can review together in the December board meeting. So I'd like to put that on the agenda. Any other comments for discussion for next board meeting?
Well, I think one of our follow-ups we determined was, the staff will begin organizing a workshop to discuss the memo about above or near above grade construction distribution systems.
I think that's excellent and would love to see that broken down into engineering considerations, environmental considerations, et cetera. So that's a note for our staff to bring that to us next board meeting. Any other comments or discussions for our next steps?
Well, I just wanted to point out that the point of the memo is that we need to start thinking about what are the regulatory.
Thank you.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Thank you for bringing that back. I can't help myself.
Yeah.
And when is our POU assessment scheduled?
Yes, so I believe we are tasked to reviewing all of the publicly owned utility wildfire mitigation plans. And I think we will be reviewing that document in our next board meeting. So our staff are preparing to help us get to that deadline. So be prepared, everybody, October, November for some review processes and comments.
And do we have a date?
We are meeting December 3rd.
December 4th.
December 4th. Board Member Seifert, I just want to make sure you have a chance to comment.
I don't have any specific comments other than just revisiting some of the topics we talked about today. So.
Great. And then Board Member Seifert and I are part of a vegetation management Bagley Keene specified breakout group. And so I'll reach out to you about that memo.
Yeah.
So I actually do have a potential area I'd like to write a memo for us to have discussions about in the future.
Great.
Which is the impact of fast trip curves that we've been seeing the industry put into place, or otherwise known as EPSS settings. These are settings normally under protection settings. There's a certain amount of time that the protective equipment delays the reaction of a circuit breaker to see if downstream protective devices can isolate the faulted area so that the impact of an outage is as small as it can be, that every protective device has an opportunity. So you think about that we operate our electrical system on a 60 hertz cycle, meaning there are 60 cycles per second. There are, there can be many cycles that we use in order to say if there's a recloser downstream that sees the fault, well, we know that the fault's downstream of the recloser. Therefore, that particular branch of the circuit gets interrupted. Not all the branches of the circuit get interrupted. Typically, that's the typical protection scheme on a distribution circuit. Now, what we're seeing in the change with the climate change and the consequences of wildfire starts in the last decade have been much more consequential than they've been in the past. And so, and in fact, if you look at it, the Dixie Fire itself, that happened on a regular day, right? So what you're seeing across the system, you saw that at Alpine Meadows, you see it at PG&E, you've seen it at other places, that they're implementing systems where the source circuit breaker trips within 3 cycles, cycle and a half, 3 cycles. And what that does is instead of having 40 cycles or 60 cycles worth of total fault energy going into the fault, which is enough to ignite usually the fuel there. We're talking about a lot of energy. If you interrupt the fault within a cycle and a half, 3 cycles, it's a lot less energy, right? The Dixie Fire, remember, it took 10 hours for that distribution circuit to cook the tree. It was a 70-foot long tree. Actually, it was probably about 50 foot with an affected tree. That's an extremely high impedance fault. Now, typically, it's a much lower impedance, and it doesn't take as long to dry out whatever piece of a critter or branch hits the line, and it'll ignite that. That's what starts. That's where you get your wildfire starts. And we've seen the utilities start to put these quick trips, sacrificing reliability. Understand that, they're saying that everyone's going to have to go with an extended fault outage instead of the 10,000 people out instead of 17 on one particular circuit. But the potential consequences of a fire start in this particular area are so bad that they're not willing to take the risk. So it isn't a magic bullet. It doesn't say that there can't be enough energy in a cycle and a half, 3 cycles to start. But there's been a remarkable reduction in the number of utility-caused wildfires in this last year. Some of that I think we can attribute to that there was more pulses of humidity from the south. There's almost a monthly pulse of humidity from the south this last year, and the fuel conditions were much different from the previous 2 years. But if you were to press me and give me, if I was to give you a guess, I would say about half of the reduction in fire starts were from the implementation of these type of settings. Now, so when we think about risk spend efficiency, and where you think about like, how are we going to factor that in? What is the right spend? There's also the consideration of, is there topography that it's simply sufficient amount of risk reduction, and that we don't need to do risk reduction for some areas because there is enough risk reduction from this new technique. And I think maybe we should I should write a memo on things to consider for future discussions at this board for consideration of recommendations to the wildfire.
That's excellent. I think also trying to articulate from the utilities what is attributed to the greater successes that they've seen in it, that is not just the weather, and how that fits into the scope of things is really difficult. Yes.
That might have been a little recommendation from our last meeting.
So that sounds really great. Thank you.
So Chair Block, our final guest speaker, Michael Wara, has joined, and he has a hard stop because he has a class to teach at 12:30, I believe. So
okay.
My suggestion would be to let him speak, and then we would return to our discussion.
Sounds great.
Okay.
Hello, Professor Wara. Thank you so much for being here with us. We're really looking forward to your presentation. Oh, you're muted.
I sincerely apologize for missing my scheduled time. I managed to have a flat tire on the side of 280 this morning, and it kind of threw off the morning. But really excited to be with you and to be sharing some of our perspectives within my research group and some of our recent work with the board. And I will just, Jonathan, would you prefer? Oh, Rain is okay. should I just share screen? Is that the most straightforward way to run this, or would you like to run my slides?
Go ahead and share the screen if
Will
you
do.
prefer.
Coming right up. I cannot start screen sharing while the other participant is sharing. Would you mind turning off? There we go. Thank you. So I'm going to talk today about work we've been doing at Stanford. And this is really a multidisciplinary piece of work that's part of a kind of broad effort undertaken at Stanford to, along with many others across California and really the whole US at this point, to better understand different aspects of the wildfire problem. At Stanford, what we've tried to do is bring together some of the machine learning based talent that exists across the university with statistical methods talent with folks like myself and my colleague Mike Mastrandrea, who are very interested in the wildfire problem. And so I just want to emphasize, Xiao Wu is the lead author on this work. He's now a faculty member at Columbia University, was a postdoc at Stanford in Stefan Wager's lab when this work was done. Oh, just lost.
Sorry. Michael, you also your screen was.
Okay.
So okay.
I'll be screen sharing for now.
Okay. Sorry. Thanks. I think that part of what this work really shows is the value of all of us getting out of our silos and trying to work across disciplines. Next slide, please. So a lot of the motivation for this work comes from conversations we've been having over the last 7 years. This is just a picture of forest treatments that were affected by the bootleg fire. You can see thinning only on the left, thinning plus prescribed fire in the center of the image, and an area that was not treated and burned at high intensity on the far right of the image. Learning from colleagues, friends, firefighting professionals about their perspectives on fire management, that there's safety in the black. Another person that I speak to often says to only map fire perimeters that are less than 10 years old. I just note that the rim fire is this year 10 years old. And then the conclusions from the fire ecologists and fire scientists that thinning and prescribed fire can significantly affect fire behavior and perhaps prevent high intensity fire in many situations. Not always, but in many situations. Now, all this sounds great. Next slide, please. The other thing we hear from a very different set of folks that we work with, we work closely with the Karuk tribe in Northern California, is just the role that they think fire plays, and they know from literally millennia of experience that fire plays in stewardship, that fire's medicine, that the land needs fire to be healthy, and that land without fire looks and is unhealthy. That fire in certain ecosystems, not all, but many ecosystems is a natural component of ecosystem disturbance, and that people have an important role in that process, particularly in the mixed conifer forests of the Sierra. That stewardship with fire is a responsibility that people have, and that the absence of fire is a failure to take responsibility for caring for land. So we've been hearing all these things for years, really, since we started working on fire in the aftermath of the Napa-Sonoma fire siege. And of course, engaging with many of the issues that you all work hard on, and with the efforts that utilities have taken to take a risk-based approach to wildfire mitigation planning, and wondering how to integrate these two bodies, these multiple ways of thinking about a problem. Next slide, please. And, you know, coming out of the policy space that we all inhabit in California have been these big questions, at least in our mind. You know, why 1 million acres? Is 1 million acres of treated land to reduce catastrophic wildfire risk, at least at, you know, landscape scale, the right number? If not, what is the right number? A concern brought up by many, and I think a legitimate concern, is what the smoke impacts of significantly scaling up some sort of land stewardship approach to wildfire risk reduction might be. You know, we know that lands that are left untreated, particularly where there's been active fire suppression for more than 100 years, can be extremely dangerous. The Caldor fire burned in such lands, and the Forest Service had previously identified the area downslope from Grizzly Flats as an area for critical fuels reduction work, and they never got to it. And the result was tragic. Well, luckily, no one lost their lives on that night. A separate, you know, a related question to the smoke issue, though, is what the actual risk reduction benefit of prescribed fire at these different scales. If it were 1 million acres, what would the benefit be in terms of risk reduction? If it were 500,000 acres, if it were only 100,000 acres like we manage today, what are the actual quantified benefits of different levels of activity? And importantly, how do those compare to other interventions that we might take? For example, reducing the probability of a utility ignition during dangerous conditions, or reducing the flammability of a structure, right, by, say, implementing a zone 0 process that's meaningful and effective. We don't really know unless we can quantify the value of all of these different approaches, quantify the risk reduction, and then a secondary step: how much does the benefit that we could identify cost to achieve? And particularly in the land management space, what we've noticed is there appear to be gaps in that analysis. Next slide, please. We know, you know, if we knew what a treatment effect was from a particular intervention, like putting fire on the ground, as you see here in Sequoia Kings, and we knew the costs, we can calculate something like a risk buy down. We can know something about, if we know the risk of fire and we know the treatment effect in terms of the change and risk delivered by a particular intervention, we know its cost, we can start to move toward some kind of estimate of the value of certain activities, which are, you know, all have costs and benefits. And what we've noticed is, particularly in the fire management space, there's no long duration model that allows, that includes both beneficial fire and wildfire that we know of, that would allow this sort of a comparison and evaluation, right? If we did 500,000 acres of prescribed fire, what would that do to our baseline level of risk? How much would it cost? What would the other costs and benefits be in terms of perhaps improved ecosystem function, perhaps decreased air quality? And I would just say that, and I think many feel this way, that the task force seems to be moving in this direction with some of the tools that they've worked very hard to develop and roll out. There are individuals within different investor-owned utilities that are thinking this way and beginning to consider, you know, that we need to think about integrated wildfire mitigation planning. We do a good job. Well, we do a job that is continuously improving in the utility wildfire mitigation space, where the utilities are learning, they are improving what they do every year. It is not perfect, but it is getting better each and every year. There's not a similar system for thinking more holistically about the problem. And we believe that a key component of that kind of holistic wildfire mitigation planning approach really needs to be quantifying benefits of interventions that many who work in the field understand to be effective, but cannot actually specify a treatment duration or a reduction in risk that is rigorously quantified. Next slide, please. So, we've identified these various needs. We think there's an important need for estimation of downstream combined beneficial and wildfire smoke impacts. Those have a very different legal context and characterization, right? Prescribed fire, beneficial fire smoke is generally oftentimes exempt, subject to permitting under the Clean Air Act because it's an intentional emission, whereas wildfire smoke very often is exempt from Clean Air Act requirements if it leads to an exceedance of air standards under the exceptional events doctrine. But from a public health perspective, we need to understand this problem in order to develop solutions to work on that asymmetry and improve on the kind of misfit between our Clean Air Act legislation and the kinds of activities we think will reduce wildfire impacts, at least in mixed conifer forests in the Sierra. We need some estimation of how different mixtures of wildfire and prescribed fire will affect smoke. At the same time, as I've said, we believe there's a strong rationale for intercomparison of risk reduction strategies. Ultimately, what we want in California are no lives lost, no communities burned. We do not necessarily want no fire. That is not actually a great solution in many parts of California. In certain parts of California, like the Southern California chaparral, where we think there is actually more fire than in the earlier times, and that may be leading to type conversion to grasses, it's a different story. And I want to just clearly distinguish that fuel type and ecosystem. See Alex smiling a little bit. But I think that's, we just have to acknowledge that this is a complex problem. There's not one California. But we do need to be thinking everywhere about this intercomparison of risk reduction strategies. It is not likely to be cost effective to eliminate the last ignition from whatever source. It's also probably not realistic because there are just too many people in California, and there are too many, if you have enough people, there's going to be a few that are stupid. And so other strategies that reduce the consequence, the right-hand side of the bow tie, are also important. And we haven't had a lot of good tools to compare across that divide. The ignition sources that we have worked very hard to eliminate in the utility space relative to other interventions that reduce the consequence and increase the degree to which we can manage fire when it does inevitably occur. I just point to a bill that did not pass this session, SB 436, as at least an attempt. This is a bill that was endorsed by both all three investor-owned utilities and the insurance industry, is an important step for California to take in this direction. We'll see where that goes in the years ahead. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we did to chip away at one of these problems. The overall goal of our work in this study, and this is a study that is in the final stages of review, so I'd appreciate folks not sharing these slides, but I'm happy to share them today. Our approach was to try to develop quantitative estimates of the treatment effect and duration of low-intensity fire on high-intensity fire in California. So I'll talk more about what I mean by that, but in general, low-intensity fire is fire that releases a low level of energy when it burns, right, as detected by a satellite, fire radiative power, FRP. And high-intensity fire is fire that releases a lot of energy. And when a lot of energy is being released, generally what you observe on the ground is high fire severity, right? Significant ecosystem impacts and soil impacts from fire that's burning with that much energy. So our approach was to construct a data set using the FRP data that's available at 1 kilometer grid scale from 2000 to 2021 with basically daily average FRP for a particular patch of land. We used CAL FIRE's FRAP data to characterize that land into hardwood and conifer forest and woodland. So generally, CAL FIRE adopts a view, it's sort of commercial timber approach to classifying land, where if the forest is dense enough to be commercially viable to log, it's categorized as forest. If it's not dense enough to commercially log, they categorize it as woodland. So we looked specifically at hardwood and conifer ecosystem types and bundled forest and woodland together, because we don't actually care if you can commercially log. We just want to know the dominant trees in the ecosystem. We excluded grasslands and shrublands, which basically equate to much of the chaparral ecosystems in Central and Southern California, for reasons I previously discussed. And we classify fires using a classification system that's been adopted in the literature from 1 to 5, where 1 is low intensity fire and 5 is basically the top 10% or so of fire radiative power in the data set. Next slide, please. So we then apply a method for causal inference called synthetic controls. And basically what that amounts to is, this is just an example of our data for conifer and hardwoods from 2008. And you can see in red areas that were burned at low intensity during 2008. And then those are matched to control areas, control regions, really, that are representative of the regions exposed to low intensity fire during the focal period. So 2008, for example, that did not burn in 2008. And so we take a sample from each year that was exposed to low intensity fire, match it using a variety of parameters to multiple regions that were not exposed to fire, and develop a synthetic version of the area that did burn that can be used to compare in later years. So that a key assumption is that our controls are representative of the regions exposed to low intensity fire, right? That the controls match the treated areas. Another assumption that's important for the broader work is that low intensity fire, and I should just say on this first assumption, at least as far as we can tell, given the wide variety of parameters we've thrown into this model, that the controls do appear to function well as being representative of the treated plots as well. A separate assumption, which is important just to say out loud, because I haven't said it yet, is that low intensity fire is a good proxy for things we might do in the management context, right? If low intensity fire is different than, say, a prescribed fire or maybe a managed wildfire, that's going to mess up at least the conclusions of what we're drawing from our study of low intensity fire. What I can say there is that there's a broad literature that suggests that the ecosystem effects and forest structure effects of low intensity fire are quite similar to broadcast burning in mixed conifer and hardwood forests in California. Next slide, please. So just to be clear, here's the kind of basic approach. We look at the pre-low intensity fire period. So in the case of the figure I just showed you, say the period prior to 2008, and we look at a pixel that we know is going to be exposed and one that isn't, and or a large number of pixels that aren't, and we construct a synthetic pixel to pair with the pixel that we are going to expose to low intensity fire. We then, during the focal period, the treatment essentially is that low intensity fire occurs on certain parts of the map, and then we evaluate after that focal period the probability of high intensity fire occurring on the treated pixel relative to high intensity fire occurring on the regions that were selected as synthetic controls for the treated pixel. Next slide, please. So here's some results. This is really the key summary figure from the work. On the left is conifer in the left-hand column, and on the right is hardwoods. And I'm going to discuss conifer first, and then I'll talk about hardwood. So the first column, effects on all fires, is basically asking the question, if there's a low intensity fire on a patch of forest, how does that affect the probability of any fire occurring on that forest, including subsequent low intensity fires in the years following the fire? And you can see we have here from 0 to 9 years, and that was the length of time that we could use given the available data set and the number of and sort of trading off significance against the lag that we could get out of the data. And you can see that, to a first approximation, low intensity fire has a very modest effect on the probability of any fire occurring on forests in mixed conifer context in California. That's just to say that, like low intensity fire doesn't mean that fire will be prevented. It means that's not a true statement. And I think no forester would adopt that view. That's not really what people say. However, if you look at the boxes in the lower left hand, effect on class 2 to 5 and effect on class 3 to 5 fires, what you can see is that low intensity fires do in fact have a very significant effect on the future presence of high intensity fire on a parcel, on a pixel. So you can see that for anything above low intensity, right, there's at least in the year following, there's a 50% reduction. The way to interpret this relative risk y-axis is to think about it as the probability of a fire occurring relative to baseline. And so there's about a 50% reduction in the risk of anything more than a low intensity fire, so a moderate to high intensity fire. And there's something better than that, maybe about a 60% reduction for high intensity fires. And that effect decays over time, just like the intuitions tell us. But here we can actually quantify when, at least given the data sets we have, the effect is gone, and say with some degree of confidence that at least for high intensity fires, the effect appears to decay away by about 8 years. So you see something more than a 50% reduction, perhaps a 60 to 65% reduction in risk of high intensity fire upon treatment. And by 8 years, you're back to baseline. And this starts to allow, and I should say we view that as a very large treatment effect. It's highly significant statistically. The effect is robust to a number of different attempts to parameterize the synthetic controls. So this is not sensitive to the model, or does not appear to be. In hardwood forests, so oak woodlands, we see similar effects for the effect of low intensity fire on all fire. We also see similar effects, but with greater uncertainty in the effect of low intensity fire on future moderate to high intensity fire. This uncertainty, that the larger band in the uncertainties in the hardwood forest, really has to do, we think, as much with the acres, right? That we just don't have as much hardwood forest and woodland. It's about 1 to 5 as we do mixed conifer forest in our sample. So potentially expanding the sample to include other jurisdictions might improve on this estimate. Although I think the complexities in terms of ecological variation will also grow as we expand the sample, and that may, to some degree, counteract the sort of more acres, more chances to evaluate treatment effects. Next slide, please. So what do we conclude? Our basic view is that, a machine learning based causal inference method has allowed for quantification of treatment effect and duration of what could broadly be characterized as good fire or beneficial fire, right? Prescribed fire, low intensity fire, and cultural burning. We have identified this need to quantify the benefit, the change in risk as an input to models aimed at understanding fire and smoke management options over long time horizons, right? This is sort of what could we do in 10 years? What if we did achieve that 1 million acre target and did so for 10 years in a row? What would the benefit actually be in terms of improved ability to suppress fire in places we don't want it, and an improved ability to tolerate fire in places we do? Next slide, please. We also note that this work strongly supports the idea that use of low intensity fire, wildfire managed for resource benefits is an excellent strategy when it can be conducted safely. This is a picture just of a nighttime strategic firing operation. Folks who are not very close to wildfire management may not know that this happens a lot, but it does. And it is done often at night to reduce the intensity of fire that occurs on the land and to improve the ecosystem outcomes. It's probably where most of the beneficial fire that does happen in California is actually occurring. And what we think we've shown is that what the firefighting folks call burn in a box is actually a quite effective strategy for reducing risk. They knew that, but I think that that's why they do it. But I think what we've shown here is a way forward toward quantifying that benefit and hopefully facilitating its greater usage. Next slide, please. So that's really what I wanted to share with you today. Next steps for us in this work are really to take a look at trying to quantify the value of fuel mosaics to risk reduction. I'll just note that this work is really looking at each pixel as independent, and that of course is not realistic. And frankly, the science we're doing in this work shows why it's not realistic. If the pixel that's adjacent has burned recently, it's a lot less likely that you're going to see high intensity fire, crown fire entering a pixel, whatever its fire history may be. And so we're looking at new methods development to try to understand the value of that fuels mosaic on catastrophic fire outcome. I guess the last thing I didn't say, and I should have mentioned it, this whole talk focused on fire intensity. Reasonable people might say, I don't care about fire intensity. That's just something a satellite sees. What I care about is fire severity, right? The impact on the ecosystem that a wildfire brings. And what I can tell you is we took the MTBS data, which is one measure of fire severity that's available, and produced very similar results in conifer forests. Our results in oak woodlands are slightly different. And again, I think that really reflects the fact that we just don't have as much data from oak woodlands because there aren't as much of them as there is mixed conifer in the Sierra. Thank you very much, and happy to take any questions if you have them.
Board Member Mader.
So ironically, I think that when Jonathan said that we might want to wait for Professor Ware because it might have some impact on our discussion, it might have some impact on the discussion. So when I was saying that we needed to look at areas where, so for your background, Professor Ware, I was discussing that we may work on a workshop to understand the impact that the utilities are making on wildfire risk by going from the traditional long circuit breaker so that downstream devices can pick up the fault to sacrificing reliability and going to quick trip settings to lessen the amount of energy. And so we've noticed that there has been a remarkable reduction in wildfire starts in this last year since the introduction of those settings. Those do also coincide with the change in weather patterns where there was pulses of humidity changing the fuel. So it's a little hard to discern, which caused which, right? However, if we were to get to the point where we're starting to understand the significance of the risk reduction that comes from using quick trip circuits, and then we were able to map our circuits against fire severity areas where you may be able to say, this is an area we're confident that this section of overhead line has sufficiently low chances of a fire start because it's in its first year or two of having a previous fire. It's not going to have enough undergrowth to be able to where a cycle and a half worth of fault current is likely to cause a fire, and we can tolerate the risk and leave that circuit in power during a high wind day instead of shutting down a town up in the foothills. So I could see potentially using it as an information source for that kind of consideration.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I would just say I would urge caution in interpreting what we think we know about EPSS and other fast trip approaches until those approaches, or that's the poor choice of words, until those approaches are tested under severe fire weather, which we have not had very much of in the last 2 years. In particular, we've not had late fall high wind offshore wind events like we had in 17, 18, 19. And that's a great thing. And I'll take luck any day of the week. But I'm interested to see how those systems perform when they are truly put to the test in a high wind, high dry fall wind event. And I'm hopeful that they'll perform as expected, but I think I really want to see that data. But the consequence of an ignition, ultimately what the WMP's target is the consequence, right? And we have very robust and well-tested and fairly elaborate models of the probability of ignition. But what happens after the ignition is a function of a lot of things that we don't understand nearly as well. And to take another, we haven't talked about it today, but the other piece of this that obviously is very important is home hardening and the value of not just home hardening generally, but home hardening where fire can enter a community, right? Where fire pathways are likely to deliver fire to structures and initiate structure to structure spread. And that's another place where I think there's a lot of value in trying to understand the information that we have. And a number of you have tried to do that. I know I read with interest Dr. Seiferd's work on this in particular, and others subsequently. But I think there's more that we can do and more that we can understand to develop a fully integrated approach to wildfire that isn't just the utilities, because as we all know, the resources there are not infinite, and so we need to make, ideally try to equalize risk spend efficiency across all the interventions that we can take to better manage the consequences of wildfire.
Professor Ware, you may want to look at our SURE risk mitigation proposal that we made. Like what we're talking about is having a workshop where we look and try to start to understand the impact of those settings. I completely agree with you that we don't know yet. Was it humidity? Was it this? Was it that? We definitely had different weather this last year than we had the 2 previous years. But it's logical that it should have an effect. It's beyond, it's very much a predictor that it's going to have some effect. So we're talking about perhaps having a memo to talk about how that what kind of effect and how we could use that to manipulate or to reduce the wildfire risk. Because you're right, there just simply isn't enough resources, and the time frame in which to, if we did have unlimited resources, there's enough construction resources, it could take 30 years or more before we could make a significant impact on. So yes, all those things need to be considered.
Michael War, I'll make sure that we send you some of those relevant documents that we've written up in the past.
I'd love to see that. Thank
Great.
you.
I thought it was somewhat ironic that board member Mader's thoughts about charred earth was that we use it as an advantage to keep the power on in places where I think in general we want to make sure we're not charring the earth, right? That tends to be where my brain goes. And I wanted to think a little bit more about the plots that you gave around low intensity fire and high intensity fire, and whether these, I guess, treatments, what the time scale is in terms of their, mitigation.
Mhm.
And this goal at 1 million acres, which is just the tip of the iceberg, right? So to speak, in California. I mean, how many acres of conifer forest or mixed conifer forest in California is still very sick and in need of treatment? And so if we do the 1 million acres and try to do 1 million acres a year, we hit 10 million acres in 10 years, and then we have to start back over again in those. What do we do about the other 20? How many do we have?
Significantly more than 20. I believe,
Okay.
I believe there are 40 million acres of forested land in California. So, yeah.
And can we do 1 million? Can we do 10 million, 5 million acres a year to get there, and then have that much smoke and all of that to get behind or to get ahead of this 100 years of sick forest?
Well, I think one thing I would say, and this is another important reason to move toward a risk-based framework in the forest management context, is that not every acre is created equally, right? There are acres that are more proximal to communities. There are acres that have the potential to serve as fire pathways wherever fires are ignited from in the backcountry. And those acres are going to be very valuable to maintain and steward, and do so in a way that is both ecologically sensitive, because we don't want to just build a parking lot around the communities that are located in rural California.
Right.
But this is a far cry from a parking lot, right? There are more valuable acres from a risk perspective and less valuable. And I agree with you that this one thing this tells you is, we can't treat them all. I think that's not a realistic goal. However, we can allow, and the reality is we're not in control over a lot of those acres, right? Fires are going to happen during fire weather, and change will occur as a result, whether, whether we like it or not. But I think what this does say is that we could do a lot to potentially manage fuels around communities in a way that would really facilitate fire suppression activity, on a bad day. It doesn't mean that these field treatments will always work, right? It's not 100%. It's not undergrounding, right? However, this is the kind of thing that will work whether the problem is undergrounding or a campfire that was not put out, as was the case apparently in the Caldor fire. And so there's value here, and the key is going to be creating a context in which we can recognize where the value is highest, where there's the greatest danger, and then put resources into those areas rather than just everywhere. It's a big state. We can't do everywhere.
Right. Board member Seifert, do you have a comment?
Oh, well, this is great to see this, Michael. I'm glad you're working on fuel treatment. And I wanted to just mention that we are working on something in Southern California, and we might want to communicate about it, where we're using a landscape fire succession model to look at various field treatment strategies in forests and other vegetation types in terms of timing, location, in the context of landscape dynamics. So you were talking earlier about what we need are longer term experiments. Now this is simulation modeling, but it's heavily parameterized with empirical data, and it accounts for things like climate change, on changing composition of vegetation. It accounts for land use change and changing patterns of wildfire ignitions, as well as fire weather. So it'll be a while before we actually have simulations out, but I think a lot of these research projects are going to start coming together to produce, synergistic results. So, yeah.
I'd love to talk more,
Yeah.
Dr. Seifert, and hear more about your work. I will reach out. It's been a while, too long. And I think that's exactly the direction that we need to be moving as a community. Because what I observe in the WMPs is a need to focus more on time as a value and a variable. And that was mentioned, right? And one aspect of that is, well, how long will it take to actually execute the thing that we think will reduce risk? Maybe there'll be a fire in the meantime. But the other piece of it is, how do we plan? Because we can't do everything this year. Right. And we need models like the one that sounds like you're constructing in order to be able to plan better. And so it's really exciting to hear that you're doing that work, because that gives me confidence it'll be good, and that it's underway.
It is underway. We're getting there. But fires are stochastic, right? And so you can't plan something and know for sure a fire is going to happen. So you have to account for probabilities. And hopefully once we get this model developed, it'll be a gift that can keep giving with different questions.
Yeah. I am very sorry. I just realized I just got a text from the other talk that I'm supposed to be giving at 12:30, and it's now 12:32. I'm so grateful for the time to appear before the board, and also just grateful for your willingness to contribute time and energy to what I think is an essential process in California. So thank you to all of you. I've really enjoyed this and enjoyed the interaction with staff as well.
Thank you very much for being here. We'll hope to follow up.
Love to.
Thanks.
All right. Bye, everyone.
So I'm going to roll that. Can I roll that into going back to our next steps conversation, or should I do public comment at this phase?
Do public comment for the agenda item.
Thanks. I'll learn eventually. Rain, are there any comments for Dr. Juarez's presentation?
At present, there are no public comments in Zoom.
Okay.
And there are none on the email.
Okay. How about from the audience? So okay, great. So there's no public comments. My comment would, and actually, board member Dr. Seifert, one of my questions would have been, what is our takeaway here for, our recommendations from the board? I love that there's this conversation, like, one, that you're doing research and he and others are doing research on this, what do you call it? Fuel treatment succession. How can we estimate what we do on the landscape, and how beneficial is it going to be? And what's the long-term plan? So my earlier question was, he was showing basically what a 10-year cycle of treatment would look like. And is that the right cycle? And it is also probably dependent on region. And where do the utilities need to listen to this, or how do we incorporate these pieces of research into understanding risk?
I think one thing that is really important to keep in mind is that, as Michael said, this study is focused on conifer forests in particular, as well as hardwoods. And, the research shows that 90% or so of structures are destroyed in shrublands. And so this kind of vegetation management, prescribed fire, bringing in good fire, low intensity fire, is critical for, reducing fire severity for ecological reasons in a lot of the overgrown forests. but I think it does, you know, we do need to keep thinking about what are the objectives and how do we look at everything holistically, as well as breaking it out into different regions. And I think what Michael is doing is really great, because he's looking at the relative effectiveness of strategies, which is what is lacking, is that, you know, we need to start gathering empirical evidence of how effective are these things that we're doing, for how long, where, and what. And so, you know, I'm not sure if I'm addressing what you're saying, but I think that it's just important that the scientists keep on doing the science so that we can best inform what others are doing. So you know, in terms of the utilities, it's sort of just more, I mean, utilities aren't out there doing prescribed fire, but they are out there doing vegetation management. And I think it just feeds into the overall picture of the complexity of the situation.
If I may,
Please.
To speak to Dr. Seiferd's comments. So, yeah, because I think sometimes I hear this discussion, and it's a discussion about wildfire in its hold. And then the work that we're actually doing here is specific to utility initiated wildfires, right? And also, you remember we in year 2 bolted on and the reducing PSPS, right? That is also a goal of the wildfire mitigation plans. And so it's not solely wildfires, right? And so when you may recall, especially you, Diane, when we first started this, and I'm a planning engineer for distribution, utility distribution systems. I say I need a map of my risks. What are the consequences of my risks, and what are my risk reduction techniques from building techniques, and I can solve this. You remember I said this. So like what I'm hearing when I hear Dr. Seiferd and when I hear Professor Ware is, you know, I'm beginning to get some more information about the topography and the risks that it will have that I have as a utility from an initiation of a wildfire, right? And if I can mitigate that risk, then I may be able to meet the second goal of the wildfire mitigation plan, which is to reduce the impact of PSPS events on folks. So they're all interrelated.
Definitely interrelated. And yeah, I mean, a PSPS event depends on more than just the location of a pole, you know. I mean, it depends on the whole fire environment that's out there. So yeah.
Any more comments from board members? I think that it was really great to have him here, and hope to continue conversations with him. Maybe he can come back. Let's roll this into our next steps discussion, which board member Mader, you sort of did, talking about how his work could dovetail into the work that you've already pitched in conversation.
Well, actually, I don't know about above grade construction.
Sure,
I think
no.
that's a different, that'll be a workshop. I believe that in the memo where I'm going to discuss how do we consider the impact of fast trip curves, and how is that going to respond on our risk beneficiency? You know, are we able to start to how do we quantify it? Where the benefit, and then, you know, potentially even how would we tolerate keeping overhead systems powered during, you know, high wind events. It's in certain locations.
I can't help but think of the other issues you've brought up in the past around risk tolerance. That's come up a lot around me recently, and that's got to be an inherent part of that whole conversation.
Yes.
Any other comments about board discussions in the future? Okay. One thing that came up in our field visits that Jonathan and I were discussing was possibly starting some investigation on the supply chain limitations and issues and how they may be impacting utility improvements. And so we might embark on that. I can't see me starting that this year while we're doing the vegetation management work. Just a thought. So if you're interested, let me know. Any more discussion points? All right. So I think we can wrap up the meeting, or am I missing anything else on the agenda?
Last public comment, Chair.
Okay, so we've had a lot today. Thank you. We want to thank everyone who's been able to be here in person. We really appreciate your attendance and your participation. Please be in touch with us if you have any insights or thoughts, things you'd like us to know or like to work with us on. We'd really appreciate it. Are there any virtual public comments remaining?
Not at this time.
Great.
And there's none on the email.
Thank you. Any current public comment in the audience? Okay, thanks again for being here. Do I hear a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Board Member Mader, so moved.
Okay, we've got a, do we have to vote? No, what do I say? Meeting's adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Okay, right.